11. The net draws closer. The next day, as I was making my rounds of the prison, I took it upon myself to inquire of a number of the prisoners as to the nature of the offences that had resulted in such drastic punishment, for to be imprisoned in Gap Kumrov was, indeed, real punishment. I found that many of them had expressed their opinions of Memphis and the Zanis too freely, and that supposed friends had informed upon them. Many did not know what the charges against them were, and quite a few were there because of old grudges held against them by members of the Zani Guard. One man was there because an officer of the Zani Guard desired his woman, another because he had sneezed while, standing upon his head, he should have been shouting Molto Memphis. The only hope any of them had of release was through bribery or the influence of some member of the Zani party, but this latter was difficult to obtain because of the fear the Zanis themselves felt of directing suspicion upon themselves. These inquiries I had made were of the prisoners in the big tanks on the main floor. My interest lay in the dim corridors below ground, where I thought that Mintep might be confined. I had not dared reveal any interest in these prisoners for fear of directing suspicion upon myself, for I knew that there were constantly informers among the prisoners, who won favors and sometimes freedom by informing upon their fellow prisoners. Torko had told me that I was not even to know the names of the prisoners on that lower level, but I was determined to learn if Mintep was among them, and finally I hit upon a plan that I hoped would serve my purpose. With difficulty, I wrote some very bad verse in Amtorian, which I sang to a tune that had been popular in America when I left the earth. In two of the verses was the message I wished to use to elicit a sign from Mintep that he was a prisoner there, and thus to locate his cell. To allay suspicion, I formed the habit of singing my song as I went about my daily duties, but I sang it at first only on the upper floors. My cordigan and some of the other members of the guard showed an interest in my song, and asked me questions about it. I told them that I didn't know the origin or significance of it, that the words meant nothing to me, and that I only sang it because I was fond of the tune. In addition to my essay at poetry, I had been busy along another line of endeavor. The cell and door locks of the prison were not all alike, but there was a master key which opened any of them. In Torko's absence, I carried this master key, and one of the first things I did after it came into my possession was to take it into the city and have 2 duplicates made. I had no definite plan in mind at the time wherein they might figure, but, though I took considerable risk in having them made, I felt that eventually they must be of the utmost value in releasing Mintep, if it developed that he was a prisoner in Gap Kumrov. You can scarcely realize the caution I was forced to observe in everything that I did, in order not to arouse suspicion, to incur enmities, or engender envy, for every citizen of Hamlot was a spy or a potential informer. Yet I had to make haste, for I knew that over my head hung constantly that Damoclean message from Muso. Who had it? Why had they not struck? I was accustomed to wandering around the prison alone, inspecting the cells, the guardroom, the kitchen, so it would arouse no comment were I discovered anywhere, and the fact that I was almost constantly humming or singing my foolish song was, I felt, evidence that there was nothing irregular or surreptitious about my activities. It was the day before Torko's return that I determined to try to ascertain definitely if Mintep were imprisoned at the lower level. With this idea in mind, I went singing through the prison, feeling, as usual, like a loony. Down to the basement I went, through the courtroom, and into the dim precincts of the forbidden cells. I went to the furnace and passed along the corridor where the cells were, and there I sang the 2 verses that I had written to arouse Mintep's interest and, perhaps, beguile an acknowledgement, if he were there. These are the verses to which I refer, roughly translated into English. Mourned by a nation, by her kinsman sought, Duer lives, and of thy fate knows naught. A word, a sign, is all she asks of thee. If thou canst give it, put thy trust in me. I kept right on singing other verses, or humming the air, as I passed along the cells, but there was no response. Clear to the end of the corridor I went, and then turned back. Once more I sang those 2 verses, and as I approached the last cells, I saw a man pressing close to the bars of one of them. In the dim light, I could not see his features plainly, but as I passed close to him, he whispered the single word, "Here." I noted the location of his cell and continued on my way. With Torco, I occupied my office next to the guardroom, and when I arrived there, I found my cordogan waiting with some new prisoners. One of my duties was to receive all prisoners, question them, and assign them to cells. A clerk kept a record of all such matters. All I was supposed to do, according to Torco, was to insult and browbeat the prisoners. There were 3 of them, and they lined them up in front of my desk. As I looked up at them, I immediately recognized one of them as Horjan, the brother of Lodas, and, to my horror, I saw recognition slowly dawn in his eyes, or at least I thought I did. "What is your name?" I asked. "Horjan," he replied. "Why are you here?" "Some time ago I reported a stranger hiding in my home," he replied. "When the guard came, they found no one, the man had escaped. They were very angry with me. A neighbor, whom I had told of my discovery of the man, became angry with me, and today he went to the Zani guard and told them that he had seen the man and that I had been hiding him, and that I only reported the matter because I knew that he would. He told them that the man was a spy from Sonara and that he was still in the city." "How does he know the man is still in the city?" I demanded. "He says that he has seen him, that he could never forget his face or his eyes. He says that the man was wearing the uniform of an officer of the Zani guard." I knew that Horjan's friend had not seen me, and that this was merely Horjan's way of communicating to me the fact that he had recognized me. "It would be too bad if your friend bore false witness against an officer of the Zani guard," I said. "If anyone did that, it would be necessary to torture him before killing him. But perhaps it would be well to question your friend to learn if he ever did see this man in your house, and have him describe him." Horjan paled. He realized that he had committed an error, and he was terrified, for he knew that his friend had never seen me and could not describe me. "I hope it does not get him in trouble," I continued. "It is deplorable that there should be so much loose talking in Amlot. It would be better if some people held their tongues." "Yes," said Horjan, meekly, "there is too much loose talk, but you may rest assured that I shall never talk." I hoped that he meant it, but I was very much concerned. Now, indeed, must I take immediate steps to escape from Amlot? But how? My problem was now further complicated by my discovery of Mintep. On the following day Torco returned, and I was sent to make an arrest in the quarter occupied by scholars and scientists. There were many Amtorians living in this quarter, for their minds inclined towards scholarly pursuits and scientific investigation. Here the few who had not been killed were segregated, not being allowed to leave the quarter, which, because of them, was in bad repute with the Zanis, who wreaked mean little persecutions on the slightest pretext. The Zanis hated scholars and scientists, as they hated all who were superior to them in any way. On my way to the quarter, I passed a field where hundreds of boys were being drilled by cordagans of the Zani guard. There were little fellows of 5 and 6 and many older boys. This same thing was going on all over Amlot. This was the only schooling the Zani boys received. The only toys they were allowed to have were weapons. Babes in arms were given blunt daggers upon which to cut their teeth. I said that was all the schooling they received. I was wrong. They were taught to shout Multu Mephis, upon any pretext or upon none, and a chapter from the life of our beloved Mephis, written by himself, was read to them daily. It was quite a comprehensive education for a Zani. The quarter where I was to make the arrest had formerly been a prosperous one, as, during the regime of the Jongs, scholars and scientists were held in high esteem, but now it was run down, and the few people I saw on the streets looked shabby and half-starved. Arrived at the home of my victim, I can think of nothing more suitable to call him. I walked in with a couple of my men, leaving the others outside. As I entered the main room, which might be called the living room, I saw a woman step hurriedly between some hangings at the opposite side of the room, but not so quickly but that I recognized her. It was Zerka. A man and woman sitting in the room rose and faced me. They both looked surprised, the woman, frightened. They were exceptionally fine-looking, intelligent-appearing people. "You are Navon?" I asked of the man. He nodded. "I am Navon. What do you want of me?" "I have orders to place you under arrest," I said. "You will come with me." "What is the charge against me?" he asked. "I do not know," I told him. "I have orders to arrest you, that is all I know." He turned sadly to say goodbye to the woman, and as he took her in his arms and kissed her, she broke down. He choked a little as he tried to comfort her. The cardigan who accompanied me stepped forward and seized him roughly by the arm. "Come on," he shouted gruffly. "Do you think we are going to stand here all day while you two dirty traitors blubber?" "Leave them alone," I ordered. "They may say goodbye." He shot me an angry look, and stepped back. He was not my own cardigan, who, while bad enough, had learned from me to temper his fanaticism a little with tolerance if not compassion. "Well," he said, "while they're doing that, I'll search the house." "You'll do nothing of the kind," I said. "You'll stay here and keep still and take your orders from me." "Didn't you see that woman sneak into the back room when we entered?" he demanded. "Of course I did," I replied. "Ain't you going to go after her?" "No," I told him. "My orders were to arrest this man. I had no orders to search the house or question anyone else. I obey orders, and I advise you to do the same." He gave me a nasty look, and grumbled something I did not catch, then he sulked for the remainder of the day. On the way back to the prison I walked beside Navon, and when I saw that the cardigan was out of earshot, I asked him a question in a whisper. "Was the woman I saw in your house, the one who ran out of the room as I came in, a good friend of yours?" He looked just a bit startled, and he hesitated a fraction of a second too long before he replied. "No," he said. "I never saw her before. I do not know what she wanted. She came in just ahead of you. I think she must have made a mistake in the house, and been embarrassed and confused when you came in. You know it is often dangerous, nowadays, to make mistakes, however innocent they may be." He could have been tortured and executed for a statement such as that, and he should have known it. I cautioned him. "You are a strange Zani," he said. "You act almost as though you were my friend." "Forget it," I warned him. "I shall," he promised. At the prison I took him at once to Torko's office. "So you are the great scholar, Navon," snarled Torko. "You should have stuck to your books instead of trying to foment a rebellion. Who were your accomplices?" "I have done nothing wrong," said Navon, "and so I had no accomplices in anything that was wrong." "Tomorrow your memory will be better," snapped Torko. "Our beloved Mephis himself will conduct your trial, and you will find that we have ways in which to make traitors tell the truth. Take him to the lower level, Vodo, and then report back here to me." As I passed through the courtroom with Navon, I saw him pale as his eyes took in the instruments of torture there. "You will not name your accomplices, will you?" I asked. He shuddered and seemed to shrink suddenly. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have never been able to endure pain. I do not know what I shall do. I only know that I am afraid, oh, so terribly afraid. Why can they not kill me without torturing me?" I was very much afraid, myself afraid for Zerka. I don't know why I should have been. She was supposed to be such a good Zani. Perhaps it was the fact that she had run away from men in the uniform of the Zani guard that aroused my suspicions. Perhaps it was because I had never been able to reconcile my belief in her with the knowledge that she was a Zani. Quite a little, too, because Navon had so palpably tried to protect her. When I returned to Torco's office, the cardigan who had been with me when I made the arrest was just leaving. Torco was scowling ominously. "I have heard bad reports of your conduct during my absence," he said. "That is strange," I said. "Unless I have made an enemy here, then you might hear almost anything, as you know. The information has come from different sources. I am told that you were very soft and lenient with the prisoners." "I was not cruel, if that is what is meant," I replied. "I had no orders to be cruel." "And today you did not search a house where you knew a woman to be hiding, the home of a traitor, too." "I had no orders to search the house or question anybody," I retorted. "I did not know the man was a traitor. I was not told what his offense had been." "Technically, you are right," he admitted, "but you must learn to have more initiative. We arrest no one who is not a menace to the state. Such people deserve no mercy." "Then you whispered with the prisoner all the way to the prison." I laughed outright. "The cardigan doesn't like me because I put him in his place. He became a little insubordinate. I will not stand for that. Of course I talked with the prisoner. Was there anything wrong in that? The less one talks with anyone, the safer he is," he said. He dismissed me then, but I realized that suspicions were aroused, and there was that brother of loaders just full of them, and of real knowledge concerning me, too, and primed to spill everything he knew or suspected at the first opportunity. Whatever I was going to do, I must do quickly if I were ever going to escape. There were too many fingers ready to point at me, and there was still the message from Muso. I asked permission to go fishing the next day, and as Torco loved fresh fish, he granted it. "You'd better stay around until after our beloved Memphis has left the prison," he said. "We may want your help." The next day Navon was tried before Memphis, and I was there with a detail of the guard, just ornamentally. We lined up at attention at each end of the bench where Memphis, Spihan, and Torco sat. The benches at the sides of the room were filled with other Zani bigwigs. When Navon was brought in, Memphis asked him just one question. "Who were your accomplices?" "I have done nothing, and I had no accomplices," said Navon. He looked haggard and his voice was weak. Every time he looked at an instrument of torture he winced. I saw that he was in a state of absolute funk. I couldn't blame him. Then they commenced to torture him. What I witnessed, I would not describe if I could. It beggars description. There are no words in any language to depict the fiendishly bestial cruelties and indignities they inflicted on his poor, quivering flesh. When he fainted, they resuscitated him, and went at it again. I think his screams might have been heard a mile away. At last he gave in. I'll tell, he shrieked. "Well," demanded Memphis. "Who are they?" "There was only one," whispered Navon, in a weak voice that could scarcely be heard. "Louder," cried Memphis. "Give him another turn of the screw. Then maybe he'll speak up." It was the Taganja Zed. Then he fainted as they gave the screw another turn. They tried to revive him again, but it was too late. Navon was dead. 12. Hunted. I went fishing, and I caught some fish, but I couldn't forget how Navon died. I shall never forget it. Nor could I forget his dying words. Coupled with what I had seen in his house, I knew the name that had died in his throat. I wondered if any of the Zanis there had guessed what I knew. Not only did I fish, but I did some reconnoitering and a great deal of thinking. I wondered what to do about Zaka. Should I risk Mintep's life to warn her, with considerable likelihood that I might be arrested with her? Really, there was but one answer. I must warn her, for she had befriended me. I sailed around close to the prison, for there were certain things I must know about the outside of the place. I knew all that was necessary about the inside. After satisfying myself on the points concerning which I had been in doubt, I came ashore, and went to my quarters in the barracks. Here I found an order relieving me of duty at the prison. I guess Torco had found me too soft for his purposes, or was there something else, something far more sinister behind it? I felt a net closing about me. As I sat there in my quarters with this most unpleasant thought as my sole company, a guardsman came and announced that the commandant wished me to report to him at once. This, I thought, is the end. I am about to be arrested. I contemplated flight, but I knew how futile such an attempt would be, and so I went to the commandant's office and reported. "A dozen prisoners have been brought from the front at Sonara," he said. "I am detailing 12 officers to question them. We can get more out of them if they are questioned separately. Be very kind to the man you question. Give him wine and food. Tell him what a pleasant life a soldier may have serving with the armies of the Zanis, but get all the information you can out of him. When they have all been questioned, we shall turn them over to some private soldiers to entertain for a few days. Then we shall send 2 of them back to the front and let them escape to tell about the fine treatment they received in Amlot. That will mean many desertions. The other 10 will be shot." The Zanis were full of cute little tricks like that. Well, I got my man and took him to my quarters. I plied him with food, wine, and questions. I wanted to know about Sonara on my own account, but I didn't dare let him know how much I knew about the city and conditions there. I had to draw him out without him suspecting me. It chanced that he was a young officer, a nice chap, well connected. He knew everyone and all the gossip of the court and the important families. There were certain questions that it would be quite natural for any Zani to ask. Those relative to the defenses of the city and other military matters he answered glibly, so glibly that I knew he was lying, and I admired him for it. When I asked him about Muso, he talked freely. It was evident that he didn't like Muso. He's turned his woman out, he volunteered. Her name is Ilana. She is a fine woman. Everyone is very much incensed over it, but what can anyone do? He is Jong. The woman he has selected in Ilana's place does not want to take it. It is common talk that she loathes Muso, but he is Jong, and if he orders her to come, she will have to come, because she has no man. He was killed here in Amlot. Muso sent him here on a dangerous mission. Everyone believes that he sent him to his death purposely. I felt myself turning cold. The next question on my lips withered in my dry mouth. I made 2 attempts before I could utter an intelligible sound. "Who was this man?" I asked. "He was the man who used to fly over your lines and drop bombs on you," he replied. "His name was Carson of Venus, odd name." I had asked my last question of that man. I took him out and turned him over to the soldiers who were to entertain the prisoners, then I hastened toward the quay. It was already dark, and the street I chose was not well lighted. That was the reason I chose it. I had almost reached the quay, when I ran into a detachment of the Zani guard in command of an officer. The latter hailed me from the opposite side of the street, then he crossed toward me, leaving his detachment behind. "I thought I recognized you," he said. "It was Mantar. I have an order for your arrest. They are scouring the city for you." "I have been in my quarters. Why didn't they look there?" "Torco said you had gone fishing." "Why am I being arrested?" I asked. "They think you are a Sanaran spy. A prisoner named Horjan informed on you. He said he found you hiding in his house just the day before you applied for a commission in the guard." "But Zerka?" I asked. "Won't they suspicion her? It was she who sponsored me." "I had thought of that," he said. "Well, what are you going to do with me?" I asked. "Are you going to turn me in?" "I wish you would tell me the truth," he said. "I am your friend, and if what Zerka and I have suspected for long is true, I will help you." I recalled that Zerka had told me I could trust this man implicitly. I was lost anyway. They had enough against me to torture and murder me. Here was a straw. I clutched it. "I am Carson of Venus," I said. "I came here with a message for Spihan from Muso. It was stolen from me." "Where were you going when I stopped you?" he asked. "I was going back to Sonara, where my friends and my heart are," I told him. "Can you get there?" "I think I can." "Then go. It is fortunate for you that none of my detail knew Vodo by sight. Good luck." He turned and crossed the street, and I went on toward the quay. I heard him say to his cardigan, "He says that Vodo is in his quarters at the barracks. We shall go there." I reached the quay without further incident, and found the same boat I had used for fishing earlier in the day and on several other occasions. It was a small boat with a single sail, scarcely more than a canoe. As I put off, I heard the sound of running feet along the quay, and then I saw men approaching. A voice cried, "Stop! Come back here," but I set my sail and got underway. Then I heard the staccato brrr of Rs, and a voice crying, "Come back here, Vodo. You can't get away." For reply I drew my own pistol and fired back at them. I knew that would disconcert their aim and give me a better chance to escape with my life. Long after I could no longer see them, they stood there firing out into the night. I thought of Mintep with regret, but there was something far more precious at stake than his life or that of any man. I cursed Muso for his duplicity, and prayed that I might reach Sonara in time. If I did not, I could at least kill him, and that I promised to do. Presently I heard the sound of a launch behind me, and knew that I was being pursued. Inside the harbor the breeze was light and fitful. If I couldn't reach the open sea ahead of my pursuers, I should have to depend upon eluding them in the darkness. In this I might be successful, or I might not. I couldn't hope to outdistance a launch even with a good wind, and about my only hope was to escape detection until I was able to discern from the sound of the launch in which direction they were searching for me. I felt that they would naturally assume that I would head northeast up the coast in the direction of Sonara, whereas my destination lay southwest, the little island where I had grounded my ship. Nor was I mistaken, for presently I heard the sound of the launch receding to my left, and I knew that it was making for the open sea by way of the easterly side of the harbor's mouth. With a sigh of relief, I kept to my course, and presently rounded the headland at the west side of the harbor and turned into the open sea. The offshore breeze was no better than that which I had had in the harbor, but I continued to hug the shore because I had one last duty to perform in Amlot before I continued on my way. I owed much to Zerka, and I could not leave without warning her of the danger which threatened her. I knew where her palace was situated on the shore of the ocean with its gardens running down to the water line. It would delay me no more than a few minutes to stop there and warn her. I felt that I could do no less. The conditions were ideal, low tide and an offshore wind. Silently and smoothly my light craft skimmed the surface of the water, the faint luminosity of the Amtorian night revealing the shoreline as a black mass dotted with occasional lights that shone from the windows of the palaces of the rich and powerful. Even in the semidarkness, I had no difficulty in locating Zerka's palace. I ran in as close as I could on the tack I was holding, then dropped my sail and paddled for the shore. Beaching my craft, I drew it well up toward the seawall, where only a very high tide could have reached it, then I made my way up to the palace. I knew that I was undergoing considerable risk, for, if Zerka were under suspicion, as I feared might be the case, she would doubtless be under surveillance. There might be watchers in the palace grounds, or even in the palace itself. For all I knew, Zerka might already be under arrest, for Narvan's dying confession was not cut off quickly enough to hide from me the identity of the accomplice he had almost named. Of course, I had already been suspicious of the truth. I did not think that the Zanis were, and so there was a possibility that they had not connected Zerka's name with that which the dying man had almost spoken. In any event, I must take this chance. I went directly to the great doors that opened onto the terrace overlooking the gardens and the sea. On Amta there are no doorbells, nor do people knock on doors, they whistle. Each individual has his own distinctive notes, sometimes simple, sometimes elaborate. At entrance doorways there are speaking tubes into which one whistles, and it was with some perturbation that I now whistled into the mouthpiece of the tube at the great doors of the Taganja's palace. I waited for several minutes. I heard no sound within the building. The silence was ominous. I was, nevertheless, about to repeat my whistle when the door swung partly open, and Zerka stepped out onto the terrace. Without a word, she took my hand and hurried me down into the garden where trees and shrubbery cast black shadows. There was a bench there, and she drew me down on it. "Are you mad?" she whispered. "They were just here looking for you." The doors on the avenue had scarcely closed behind them when I heard your whistle. "How did you get here? If you can get away again, you must leave at once. There are probably spies among my servants." "Oh, why did you come?" "I came to warn you." "Warn me? Of what?" "I saw Navon tortured," I said. I felt her stiffen. "And?" Mephis was trying to wring the names of his accomplices from him. Did he speak?" she asked breathlessly. "He said, the Taganja, and died with the beginning of her name on his lips. I do not know that Mephis suspected, for he had not seen what I had in the house of Navon, but I feared that he might suspect, and so I came here to take you to Sonara with me." She pressed my hand. "You are a good friend," she said. "I knew that you would be, and it was first proved to me when you prevented that cardigan from searching the back room of Navon's house. Now you have proved it again. Yes, you are a very good friend, Carson of Venus." That name on her lips startled me. "How did you know?" I asked. "When did you find out?" "The morning after we dined together that first time in the evening of the day that you entered Amlot." "But how?" I insisted. She laughed softly. "We are all suspicious here in Amlot, suspicious of everyone. We are always searching for new friends, expecting new enemies. The instant that I saw you in that restaurant I knew that you were not of Amlot, probably not of Corva, but if you were of Corva, the chances were excellent that you were a spy from Sonara. I had to find out. Oh, how many times I have laughed when I recalled your stories of Vodaro. Why, you didn't know the first thing about that country." "But how did you find out about me?" I demanded. "I sent an emissary to your room in the traveler's house to search your belongings while you slept. He brought me Muso's message to Spihan." "Oh, so that is why that was never used against me," I exclaimed. "It has had me worried ever since it disappeared, as you may well imagine. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't. You have no idea how careful we have to be." "You were very careless in going to the house of Navon," I said. "We hadn't the slightest reason to believe that Navon was suspected. Now that I know how loyal you are, I don't mind telling you that we are planning a counter-revolution that will overthrow the Zanis and restore Cord to the throne." "That can never be done," I said. "Why?" she demanded. "Cord is dead." She was horrified. "You are sure?" she asked. "I saw Mephis assassinate him." I told her the story briefly. She shook her head sadly. "There is so much less to fight for now," she said. "Muso might easily be as bad as Mephis." "Muso is a traitor to his own country," I said. "That message I brought you proves it clearly. I wish that I had it now to take back to Sonara with me. The army would rise against him, and with Cord dead, the people would rally around the man they love and make him Jong." "Who is that?" she asked. "Tarman," I said. "Tarman? But Tarman is dead." "Tarman dead? How do you know?" My heart sank at the thought. Duer and I would have no powerful friend in Sonara. We heard some time ago from a captured Sanaran officer that Muso had sent him to Umlot on a dangerous mission and that he had never returned to Sonara. It was a foregone conclusion that he must be dead. I breathed a sigh of relief. He was returned safely to Sonara before I left there, and unless he has been killed since I came to Umlot, he is still alive. You shall have the message, she said. I kept it. But how do you expect to escape from Umlot and get back through the Zani lines in safety? Do you forget that Carson of Venus is the mistral that flies over Zani troops and drops bombs on them? I asked. But the thing you fly in? You haven't that here. It is not far away. I am praying that nothing has happened to it. That was the chance I had to take. You are so lucky that I am sure you will find it just as you left it. And, speaking of luck, how in the world did you ever get out of the city, with the entire Zani guard looking for you? They are absolutely turning the city inside out, I am told. I was stopped by a detachment of the guard on my way to the quay. Fortunately for me, it was commanded by Mantar. He is a good friend, thanks to you. He is one of us, she said. I suspected you both almost from the first, notwithstanding your multumephyses and your Zani salutes. I was so sure of you that I was a little freer than usual. Somehow, I knew you were all right, you just couldn't have been a Zani at heart. We shouldn't be sitting here talking, I told her. Go get Muso's message and a few of your belongings, and we'll be on our way to Sonara. She shook her head. I wish that I might, she said, but I have a duty to perform before I leave Umlot. There is nothing more important than saving your life, I insisted. There is something more important to me than my life, she replied. I am going to tell you what it is and why I must stay and what I am going to do, something that I have shared with only Mantar before. Mantar and my man were the closest of friends. They were officers in the same regiment of the Zhong's Guard. When Mephis formed the Zani party during the last disastrous war, my man was one of his bitterest foes. It was in the last battle of the war that my man was supposed to have been killed. His body was never found. But he was not killed in battle. A private soldier, who had been closely attached to Mantar, saw my man die, and he told Mantar the story of his end. He was tortured and murdered by a band of Zanis under direction of Mephis. When I learned this, I swore to kill Mephis, but I wished to wait until my act would be of service to my country. We are preparing for a sudden stroke at Zani power. When our forces are ready, the violent death of Mephis would throw the Zanis into at least temporary demoralization. I must be here to see that he dies a violent death at the proper time. But suppose you are suspected now and arrested. You can't carry out your plan then. If I am arrested, I shall still carry out my plan to kill Mephis, she said. I shall certainly be taken before him for questioning and probably for torture, then I shall kill him. You must go now. I'll fetch Muso's message. Just a moment, and she was gone. I felt a wave of melancholy surge through me as I sat there waiting for her to return. I knew that I should never see her again, for she was going to certain death, even if she succeeded in destroying Mephis. She was so beautiful and fine, such a loyal friend, it was tragic that she must die. Presently she came back with Muso's message. Here it is, she said. I hope it puts Tarman on the throne. I wish that I were to live to see that day. Then she, too, knew that she would not. I think I loathed Mephis more that instant than I ever had before, which is saying something which no superlative can express. I am coming back, Zaka, I said. Perhaps I can aid you in the overthrow of the Zanis. A few bombs at the psychological moment might help your cause. Or maybe you will have changed your mind and decided to come away with me. Now listen carefully. Southwest of Umlot is a flat-topped mountain. Yes, she said, it is called Borson. 2 rivers join just this side of it, and in the fork of the rivers there is a farm. It belongs to a man named Loders. I know him well, she said. He is one of us, a loyal soul. When I come back I shall circle over the farm of Loders, I explained. If I see a smoke fire lighted in one of his fields, I shall know that I am to land for a message from you or, better still, for you, I hope. If I see no smoke, I shall fly on to Amlot and circle the city. That will throw the city into a turmoil, I am sure. You will hear of it and see me. If you are alive, you will make one smoke fire on your beach, here. If you would like to have me bomb the palace and the barracks, you will light 2 smoke fires. If I see no smoke fire, I shall know that you are dead, and then I shall bomb hell out of the Zanis. What is hell? She asked. That is something peculiar to Earthmen, I laughed. And now I must be going. Goodbye, Zerka. I touched her hand with my lips. Goodbye, Carson of Venus, she said. I hope that you do come back and bomb hell out of the Zanis. 13. Danger in Sonara. As I put out to sea from the beach in front of the palace of the Taganja Zerka, my mind was filled with such emotions as beg a description. My beloved Duer was in grave danger in Sonara, the greatest danger being that she might be forced to die by her own hand, which I knew she would do rather than mate with Muso. And in Amlot I was leaving behind a good friend who was in equal danger, and in the prison of death lay Duer's father. If ever a man's mind was beset by apprehension of dire import, it was mine that night. Standing out from shore, I caught a brisker breeze, which finally veered into the northeast and drove me along at a spanking pace. As the wind rose, so did the seas, until I began to have doubts as to the ability of my frail craft to weather them. It was an almost following wind, and constantly I was expecting to be engulfed by the growing seas that pursued me. The lightness of my boat, however, kept me just out of danger from that cause, but there was always the possibility of striking a submerged rock or a reef in this sea of which I knew nothing. I was compelled to stay always too close to land for safety, lest I pass my little island without recognizing it as such, but at last I saw it, and, without a great deal of difficulty, made the little cove where I had previously been taken off by Loders. The fear that now assailed me was as to the safety of my ship. Would I find it where I had left it? What if some prowling fisherman had discovered it? I thought of a dozen reasons why it should be missing or destroyed as I drew my canoe safely out of the water and hastened across the island toward the spot where I had fastened the Aenotar down. At last I saw it dimly through the night, and then I was beside it. The reaction and the relief left me weak for a moment, as I realized that the ship was just as I had left it. Casting off the ropes and throwing them into the rear cockpit, I taxied out into open meadow that formed the greater part of the island. A moment later I was in the air and heading straight for Sonara. I saw lights in Loders' cottage as I sped past, and a moment later the lights of Amlot shone on my right. After that I saw no sign of life until the campfires of the Zani army flickered below me, and then, ahead, I could see the glow of the lights of Sonara. My Duer was there. In a few minutes I should be holding her in my arms again. I tried to open the throttle wider, only to find that it was open as far as it would go. I had been running the engine at maximum all the way from Amlot without realizing it, but I had made good time. I had left the Zani barracks and started for the quay about the 20th hour. It was now approaching only the 26th hour. In 6 Amtorian hours, which are equivalent to 4 Earth hours, I had made my escape from Amlot, sailed about 10 miles along the coast, and flown to Sonara. That little gale had helped me on my way, and my light craft had practically flown the distance. I approached Sonara without lights and at a high altitude, then I spiraled down from directly above the landing field that I had previously used. I knew every bump and depression in it, so many times had I used it. With my noiseless motor, I came in as quietly as a falling leaf, and taxied to the hangar that Muso had built for me. The field was deserted, and the hour being late and few people on the streets in this district, I believe that no one saw my ship or saw me land. That was as I wished it, for I wanted to see Duer and Tarman before I talked with anyone else. I kept my flying helmet on to hide my Zani haircut, hoped that no one would notice my Zani trappings, and set out on foot in the direction of Tarman's palace. As I approached it, I saw Muso's palace across the avenue, brilliant with 1,000 lights. Many gorgeously trapped ganters were waiting patiently along both sides of the avenue. Strains of music floated out into the night from the interior of the palace. I could also hear the murmur of many voices. It was evident that Muso was entertaining. One of the sentries in front of Tarman's palace stepped up to me as I stopped at the entrance. "What do you want?" he demanded. I guess putting a man in front of a door anywhere in the universe must do something to him. The tremendous responsibility implicit in such a cosmic assignment seems to remove all responsibility for good manners. I have seldom known it to fail. When it does, they must immediately transfer the man to some other form of activity. "I want to go in," I said. "I am Carson of Venus." The fellow stepped back as though he had seen a ghost, as I imagine that he thought he had, for a moment. "Carson of Venus," he exclaimed. "We thought you were dead. Muso issued a proclamation of mourning for you. You must be dead." "I am not, and I want to go in and see my wife and Tarman." "They are not there," he said. "Where are they?" "Across the street." He looked a bit uncomfortable as he said it, or was it my imagination? "Then I'll go over there," I said. "I do not think Muso will be glad to see you," opined the sentry, but I had already started, and he did not attempt to detain me. Once again, at Muso's palace, I was stopped by a sentry. He wouldn't believe that I was Carson of Venus, and was going to have me carted off to jail. But I finally prevailed on him, by means of a small bribe, to call an officer. He who came, I had known quite well and had liked. I had taken him up in my ship a number of times, and we were good friends. When he recognized me, he looked mighty uncomfortable. I laid a hand on his arm, reassuringly. "Please don't be embarrassed," I begged. "I have heard. Am I in time?" "Thank the good fates, you are," he replied. "It was to be announced at the 27th hour this night. It is almost that now." "And I may go in?" I asked, out of courtesy, for I intended going in, if I had to kill someone doing it. "I would be the last man to stop you," he said, "even if I lost my head for it." "Thanks," I said, and ran up the broad stairway beyond the ornate portals. I could see down the center corridor to the great throne room. It was packed with the aristocracy of Sonara. I knew that whatever of interest was taking place in the palace was taking place there, so I hurried along the corridor toward the doorway. Over the heads of the assembly I could see Muso standing on a dais beside the throne. He was speaking. "A Jong," he was saying, "must take his woman before the eyes of all men, so that all may know whom to honor as their Vajong. Being without a woman, I have chosen to honor one whose man gave his life in the service of Corva and myself. It is the highest award of merit that I can confer upon his memory." I was elbowing my way through the crowd to the discomfiture of ribs and toes and to the accompaniment of scowls and muttered imprecations. Finally an officer seized me by the shoulder and swung me around facing him. When he saw who I was, his eyes went wide, and then a wry smile twisted his lips as he let me go and gave me a push forward. As I came in full view of the dais, I saw Duer sitting on a low bench, her eyes staring straight ahead, that noble little head of hers unbowed. A strapping warrior of the Jong's guard sat on either side of her. That was the only reason she was there. "And now," said Muso, "lives there any man who says I may not take Duer, Janjong of Vapaja, to be my queen?" "There does," I said in a loud voice, stepping forward. Duer looked quickly down at me, then, before the warriors could prevent, she had leaped to the floor and flung herself into my arms. Muso stood there with his mouth open, his arms hanging limply at his side. If the saying about having the starch taken out of one was ever appropriate, it was then. Here was a situation with which it seemed impossible for him to cope. Here was a problem without a solution. Finally he forced a sickly smile. "I thought you were dead," he said. "This is indeed a happy moment." I just looked at him, and made no reply. The silence in the room was deathlike. It must have lasted for a full minute, which is a very long time under such circumstances. Then someone started for the doorway, and like a funeral procession the guests passed out. I felt a hand on my arm, and turned to see whose it was. It was Tarman's. Jahara was at his side. She looked both frightened and pleased. "Come," he said, "you had better get out of here." As we reached the doorway, I turned and looked back. Muso was still standing there beside his throne like one in a trance. We left the Zhong's palace and crossed directly to Tarman's, nor did any of us breathe freely until we were seated in Jahara's boudoir. "You will have to leave Sonara at once," said Tarman, "tonight, if possible." "I don't want to leave Sonara," I said. "At last Duer and I have found a place where we might live in peace and happiness. I shall not let one man drive me out." "But you cannot fight the Zhong," he said, "and until Cord is restored, Muso is Zhong." "I think I can," I said, "and I think I can create a new Zhong. Cord is dead." "Cord dead? How do you know?" "I saw Memphis kill him, and then I told them the story of the assassination of the Zhong of Corva." "And the new Zhong?" asked Jahara. "Who is he to be?" "Tarman," I said. Tarman shook his head. "That cannot be. I owe allegiance to Muso, if Cord be dead." "Even if he were proved to be a traitor to his people?" I asked. "No, not in that event, of course, but Muso is no traitor to the people of Corva." "How many high officers of the army and officials of the government would feel as you do?" I asked. "All but a few who owe everything to Muso," he replied. "How many of them can you gather here tonight?" I asked. 20 to 30 of the most important," he said. "Will you do it?" "I ask you to trust me. It will be for the best good of Corva, the country that I would wish to make my own." He summoned several aides and gave instructions. Then Tarman, Jahara, and Duer settled down to listen to the story of my adventures in Amlot while we awaited the coming of the invited guests. I did not tell Duer that I had found her father a prisoner in a Zani prison until after we were alone together the next morning after the guests had left. She was very brave about it, and was confident that I would rescue him eventually. At last the great men commenced to arrive. There were generals and councillors of state and great nobles of the realm, the flower of Corvan aristocracy that had escaped the Zani massacres. We met in the large audience chamber and were seated at a great table that had been brought into the room for the occasion. Tarman was seated at the head of the table. I, being without nobility or rank, sat at the lower end. When all were seated, Tarman rose. "You all know Carson of Venus and what he has done for Sonara," he said. "He has asked me to call you together at this late hour because a national emergency exists. I trust him, and have taken his word that such is the case. I feel that we should listen to him. Are you all agreed?" 30 heads nodded gravely, then Tarman turned to me. "You may speak, Carson of Venus," he said, "but you must have proof of what you have insinuated to me, for though you are my friend, my first duty is to my Zhong. Do not forget that. Proceed." "Let me put a hypothetical question to you gentlemen before I lay my information before you," I commenced. "If it were proved beyond doubt that your Zhong had sought to conspire with the enemy to cause the defeat of the forces holding Sonara and turn the city over to the Zanis at a price, would you feel that you were relieved of your oaths of allegiance to him and be warranted in replacing him with one of royal blood in whom you had the utmost confidence?" Many a face was clouded by a resentful scowl. "You are suggesting a grievous charge," said a great general. "I am asking you a hypothetical question," I replied. I have made no charge. Do you care to answer? There is no question as to what I should do, said the general, if such an emergency confronted me. I should be the first to turn against any Jong who did such a traitorous thing as that, but that is something that no Jong of Corva would do. And you other gentlemen? I asked. Without exception they all concurred in the sentiments of the general. Then I may tell you that such an emergency exists, I said. I shall shock you by my disclosures, but I must have your assurance that you will hear me through and consider impartially the evidence I have to offer. I can assure you that we shall, said Tarman. Muso, swearing me to secrecy, sent me to Amlot with a message for Spihan, Mephis's chief lieutenant. He chose me for two reasons. One was that he thought I could not read Amtorian, and therefore could not know what was in the message, and the other you had proof of in his palace this night. He wanted my woman. But I can read Amtorian, and after I got to Amlot, I became suspicious and read Muso's message to Spihan. In it he offered to open the gates of Sonara to Zani troops in return for the throne of Corva, and he agreed to accept Mephis as his advisor and to reward the Zanis. He also suggested that it would be best if Carson of Venus were destroyed in Amlot. This is preposterous, cried a great noble. The man must be mad to make such charges. They are prompted by jealousy, because Muso desires his woman. They cannot be true, exclaimed another. Tarman, cried a third, I demand this man's arrest. You are not keeping your promise to me, I reminded them. Is this what I am to expect of Corvan nobility? And do you think I am such a fool as to make charges of this kind without ample evidence to substantiate them? What would I have to gain? I would be signing my own death warrant. I may be doing so anyway, but I am doing it for the only country on Amta that I can call my own, the one country in which my princess and I feel that we have a chance to live happily among friends. Go on, said the great general. I apologize for my confreres. Where are your proofs? Asked Tarman. Here, I said, and drew Muso's message from my pocket pouch. Here, in his own handwriting, Muso convicts himself. I handed the envelope to Tarman. He opened it and read it through carefully to himself, then he passed it to the man to his right. Thus it passed around the table, each man reading it carefully. It left them silent and sober-faced. Even after the last man had read it and passed it back to Tarman, they sat in silence. It was the great general who spoke first. I do not doubt the integrity of this man or his belief in the duplicity of Muso, he said. It is sufficient to shake the confidence of each of us. In addition, he knows that Muso sought his life. I cannot blame him for anything he may think. I should think as he does, were I he. But he is not a Corvan by birth. There is not bred in him the reverence and loyalty to our Jongs that is part of every fibre of our beings. For him, this document is sufficient proof. As I have said, it would be for me, were I he, but I am not. I am a Corvan noble, the first general of the Jongs' armies, and so I must give Muso the benefit of every doubt. Perhaps this message was a ruse to lure the Zani troops from some part of the line, that Muso might order an attack upon that weakened part. It would have been excellent strategy. Now I suggest that we prove conclusively whether such was his intent, or whether he did intend to open the gates to the enemy. How may that be done? Asked Tarman. We shall try to arrange to have the enemy shoot 3 blue rockets into the air before the main gates of Sonara on 3 successive nights, then wait and see what Muso does. But how can we get the enemy to cooperate? Asked another. I shall commission Carson of Venus to drop a message behind their lines, telling them that I should like to hold a parley with them and asking them, if they are agreeable to the suggestion, to shoot the blue rockets. An excellent suggestion, said Tarman. But, I objected, seeing me returned alive, Muso may be suspicious, for he definitely asked Spihan to have me destroyed. Write a report, said the general, stating that after you delivered the message you became fearful and escaped. That would certainly arouse Muso's suspicions, said Tarman. I might tell him the truth, I suggested, and that is that the very night I arrived in Amlot the message was stolen from me. The very fact that I remained there so long should convince Muso that I had no suspicion of what the note contained. I think your idea is the best one, said the general, but why did you stay so long in Amlot if you could have escaped? I had several reasons, I replied. I suspected that Mintep, Jong of Vapaja and father of my princess, was a prisoner there. I also wanted to gather what information I could for the Sanaran High Command. Lastly, I had to establish myself before I could safely make an effort to escape. I became an officer in the Zani Guard and was, for a while, acting governor of the Gap Kumrov. And you absorbed some information? Much, I replied. I have learned that a counter-revolution is about to be launched, the proponents of which hoped to restore Cord to his throne. You say hoped, commented a noble. Have they now given up the idea? Cord is dead, I said. I might as well have thrown a bomb among them. They leaped to their feet almost as one man. Cord dead? It was the same stunned reaction that I had seen before. But, cried one, we have heard that rumor often before, but it has never been substantiated. I saw him die, I told them, then I had to go all over that harrowing episode again. Well, at last they prepared to go, but before they did I propounded another question. And now, gentlemen, I said, just who is going to protect my princess and me from Muso? If I am not mistaken, I stand a good chance of being assassinated the first time I go on the streets. He is right, said the general. He should certainly be protected, General Vero, agreed Tarman. Well, said Vero, I know of no safer place for them than where they are now, under the protection of the man who is next in line for the throne of Corva, after Muso. There was a subdued cheer at that, but I was not surprised. Tarman was the most popular man in Sonara. He sat for a moment with his head bowed, and then he looked up at Vero. His face showed traces of mental strain, his manner was tinged with embarrassment. I wish that I might agree with you in that, he said, but, unfortunately, I cannot. As a matter of fact, I believe that my palace would be the least safe place for Carson of Venus and the Janjong of Vapaja. During the past 10 days 3 attempts have been made upon my life, twice by poison, once by dagger. The disclosure so shocked the assembled nobles, that, for a moment, there was deep silence, then Vero spoke. Were the scoundrels apprehended? He asked. Do you know who they were? Yes, replied Tarman, but they were only the instruments of another. And you know whom that may be? Asked a noble. I can only surmise, replied Tarman. Unfortunately, my retainers killed all 3 before I had an opportunity to question them. Perhaps I had better remain here, then, I said, as additional protection for the next Jong of Corva. No, said Tarman. I appreciate your generosity, but I am well protected by my own people, and there are more important things for you to do. You may come to my palace, said Vero. I swear no one shall take you from there, even if I have to protect you with the entire army of Sonara. I shook my head. Muso will unquestionably send for me, I said. Should you refuse to give me up, his suspicions would be aroused, and our entire plan might come to nothing. I think I have a solution of the problem. What is it? Asked Tarman. Let Vero prepare his message to the enemy at once. At the same time I shall write my report to Muso. Get 2 officers to volunteer for extra hazardous duty. I shall want them to accompany me. As soon as Vero's message is ready, Vero can order me out on special duty. I shall take my princess and the 2 officers with me, drop the message behind the enemy lines, and remain away until you shall have had time to determine Muso's guilt or assure yourselves of his innocence. When I return above Sonara, Liberate 1 balloon if it is unsafe for me ever to return to Sonara. Liberate 2 if I am to return another day for further advice. Liberate 3 if it is safe for me to land. In the event that I cannot land in safety to myself, I shall land the 2 officers the night that I get the message, and I must have your assurance now that I shall be permitted to do so and take off again in safety. The entire plan is excellent, said Tarman. Please put it in writing, so that there shall be no misunderstanding of the signals. May I ask why you wish to have 2 of our officers accompany you? Asked Vero. One of them will have to go with me into Amlot while I attempt to liberate the Jong of Vapaja from the Gap Kumrov. The other will remain with my princess and the ship while I am away in Amlot. I shall have no difficulty in obtaining volunteers, said Vero. Now, if we are to get you away before dawn, we must get to work. 14. Back to Amlot. An hour before dawn we left the palace of Tarman, Duer, the 2 officers who had volunteered to accompany us, and I. Because of Duer, I felt nervous and uneasy, for we had to leave the palace in full view of the guards before the palace of Muso, directly across the avenue, and while the fact that Vero had furnished us with a strong guard imparted a feeling of greater security, yet, at the same time, it certainly made us extremely conspicuous. There were 10 military gantas loaded with soldiers, constituting what, to me, had taken on the proportions of a pageant, and I can tell you that I breathed a sigh of relief when I had my party aboard the ship and was taxiing out for the takeoff, and as we soared above the walls of Sonara and out across open country, I was happier than I had been for many days. Once again I was free, and I had Duer with me. I had put Yulin and Ligon, the 2 officers, in the cabin. Duer sat beside me, and there was a basket of small bombs in each cockpit. The ship was more heavily laden than it had ever before been, but that had seemed to make no appreciable difference in the takeoff, nor could I see that she handled differently in flight. We had determined in Havatu, while designing her, that she would easily lift a load of 1,500 pounds, so I had little doubt that she would have no trouble with the approximately 1,000-pound load that she was now carrying. I flew slowly toward the enemy camp, killing time until daylight should have come. Yulin and Ligon were thrilled beyond words, for this was the first flight either of them had taken, while Duer and I were just content to be together again, holding hands like a couple of kids. I had hurriedly contrived a tiny parachute before leaving Tarman's palace. It consisted of a square of very light fabric woven from the web of a small cousin of the targo, a giant spider that inhabits the mile-high trees that grow in many parts of Amta, and which is so sheer as to be almost invisible, yet quite strong. To the 4 corners of this square piece I had tied strings, and to the ends of these strings I had attached the leather envelope which bore Vero's message to the enemy. Dawn was just breaking as we flew over the Zani camp. An alert sentry must have sighted us, for I distinctly heard a shout, and almost immediately saw men running from the shelters which lined the streets of the camp. I continued to circle above them, well out of range of our rays, until it was entirely light. Then, estimating the velocity of the wind, I flew a little way beyond the windward side of the camp and tossed the message overboard. The little parachute opened immediately and floated gracefully down toward the camp. I could see thousands of men by now standing with upturned faces, watching it. They must have thought that it was some new engine of destruction, for when it came close to the ground near the center of the camp, they scattered like sheep. I continued to circle until I saw a brave soul advance to where the message lay and pick it up. Then I dipped a wing and flew away. The trip to the island was uneventful. I circled Lodaz's house for quite some time, but no smoke signal was lighted. Then I dropped over to the island and landed. The country, except in the vicinity of the cities, is strangely deserted in every part of Amta that I have visited. Between Sonara and the farm of Lodaz we had not seen a sign of human life except that in the camp of the Zanis, which, of course, was no permanent habitation. Few farmers have the temerity that Lodaz displayed in locating a farm so far from civilization, and open constantly to the danger of attack by some of the fearsome creatures which roam the plains and forests of Venus. It was, however, The very fact that few men traversed these interurban wildernesses that had rendered my little island so safe a place to hide the Anotar, and also the little craft that had brought me there from Amlot and which I hoped would bear me back to the Zani stronghold. As we came into land, I saw my boat lying where I had dragged it, and one more cause of anxiety was removed. Now I had only to wait for darkness and the proper moment to launch my attempt to rescue Mintep. I told Legan that he was to remain with Duer in the unlikely event that she should need protection, and I also instructed her to take to the air if any danger threatened them. Duer was by now an efficient pilot. I had taken her with me on many of my flights over the enemy lines, and had her practice landings and takeoffs on the surface of a dry lake I had discovered some 50 miles west of Sonara. I had also let her take off and land at the racing field in Sonara. She was quite competent to land anywhere that conditions were reasonably favorable. I drew a rough map of Amlot for her, marking the location of the palace and the barracks, and told her that if I had not returned to the island by dawn, she and Legan were to fly along the coast toward Amlot, keeping a close lookout for my boat, and if they did not see me, they were to fly over the city and drop bombs on the palace and the barracks until they saw me put out into the harbor. I was sure they would be able to identify me from the air because of my flying helmet. It had taken me about 3 Amtorian hours to sail from Amlot to the island. Allowing 8 hours for the round trip, including the time it might take to get into the Gap Kumrov and take Mintep out, I estimated that I should leave the island about the 29th hour in order to get back by dawn. In the event that Yulin and I never returned, Duer was to take Legan back to Sonara, and if 3 balloons were sent up, indicating that it was safe to land, she should do so, for I felt that she would be safer there than anywhere else. If the signal were a discouraging one, she might try to reach Verpaja, but that would be almost suicidal, since she could not approach anywhere near Kuard, her city, in the ship, and the dangers she would encounter on the ground were far too numerous and terrible to render it at all likely that she would survive. "Do not even think of anything so terrible as that you may not return from Amlot," she begged. "If you do not, it will make no difference where I go, for I shall not live. I do not care to live unless I have you, Carson." Yulin and Legan were on the ground inspecting the boat, so I took her in my arms and kissed her, and told her that I would come back. "For no one but your father would I go to Amlot and risk your life as well as my own," I said. "I wish you did not have to go, Carson. What a strange retribution it would be if, for the sake of the throne I gave up for you, I should lose you. It would not be just retribution, though it would be wicked." "You'll not lose me, dear," I assured her, "unless your father takes you away from me. He can't do that now. Even though he is my father and my Jong, I should disobey him if he sought to. I'm afraid he's going to be, well, disagreeable about the matter," I suggested. "You know how shocked you were at the very thought of even talking to me. When I told you I loved you, you wanted to knife me, and you really felt that I deserved death. How do you suppose he's going to feel about it when he finds that you are irrevocably mine? He'll want to kill me." "When are you going to tell him?" she asked. "After I get him here on the island. I'm afraid he'd upset the boat if I told him at sea." She shook her head dubiously. "I don't know," she said. "I can't imagine how he'll take it. He is a very proud Jong, steeped in the traditions of a royal family that extends back into prehistoric times, and, Carson, he does not know you as I do. If he did, he would be glad that his daughter belonged to such as you. Do you know, Carson, he may even kill me. Even though you think you know, yet you have no conception of the taboos and interdictions that dictate the attitude of all toward the sacred person of the virgin daughter of a Jong. There is nothing in your life with which I may compare it. There is nothing that you so reverence and hold so sacred." "Yes, there is, Duer," I said. "What?" she demanded. "You." "Fool," she said, laughing. "But you're a dear fool, and I know that you believe what you said." The day drew to a close and the night wore on. Yulin and Legan amused themselves by fishing, and we built a fire and cooked what they caught, enjoying an unexpectedly excellent meal. I cut a slender sapling about 20 feet long and stowed it in the boat. As the 29th hour approached, I kissed Jue goodbye. She clung to me for a long time. I know she thought it was the last time she should ever see me. Then Yulin and I embarked. A good breeze was blowing, and we skimmed away into the darkness, bound for Amlot. Did you ever reach into an inside pocket time after time to assure and reassure yourself that you had not forgotten the theatre tickets that you knew were there? Well, that's the way I kept feeling in my pocket pouch for the duplicate master key to the cells of the prison of death I had made just before I left Amlot. And not without reason was I thus solicitous. Without that key, not even an act of God could have gotten Mintep's cell door unlocked without the cooperation of Torko, and somehow I couldn't see Torko cooperating. We rounded the headland and drew into the harbour of Amlot just before the 3rd hour. Running before the wind, we approached the little island of horror where loomed the Gap Kumrov. As we came closer to shore I lowered the sail, lest its white expanse be seen by some watchful Zani eye, and paddled quietly in beneath those frowning walls. Feeling my way cautiously along the cold, damp stones, I came at last to that which I sought, the opening of the chute through which the ashes of burned men are discharged into the bay. Yulin and I spoke no word, as all the way from the island I had been coaching him on what he was to do, so that it would be unnecessary for us to speak in other than an emergency. Once more I felt to learn if I still had the key. Then, as Yulin held the boat in position beneath the mouth of the chute, I carefully inserted the pole I had prepared and pushed it up its full length, letting the lower end rest on the bottom of the boat. This done, I proceeded to climb up the pole into the chute. Disturbed by the pole and my body brushing the sides of the chute, the ashes of 1,000 dead men drifted gently down upon me. When I reached the top of the pole, I raised one hand directly over my head. To my vast relief, it came in contact with the trapdoor just a few inches above me. I pushed up, and raised it far enough so that I could grasp the sill with my fingers, then remained quiet, listening. Only the moans and groans of the prisoners came to my ears. There was no alarm. So far, none had heard me. Pulling myself up, I raised the door with my head and shoulders until I could fall forward with the upper half of my body on the floor of the furnace room. A moment later I stood erect. A few steps brought me to the dimly lighted corridor. I knew exactly where Mintep's cell lay, and walked directly to it. Whatever I was to do must be done quickly and silently. Pressing my face to the bars, I looked in. I thought I saw a figure in the far corner, a figure huddled on the floor. I inserted the key in the lock and turned it. The door swung in. I crossed and kneeled beside the figure, listening. By the breathing, I knew that the man slept. I shook him lightly by the shoulder, and as he stirred I cautioned him to silence. "Are you Mintep?" I asked, fearful that he might have been taken to his death and another placed in his cell since I had located it. I had not served in this prison without having learned how quickly changes might come, how unexpectedly one man might be rubbed out to make place for another. I held my breath waiting for his reply. At last he spoke. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Never mind that," I snapped a little irritably. "Are you Mintep?" "Yes," he said. "Come with me quietly. Jue is waiting for you." That was enough. Like a new man, he came to his feet and followed me stealthily to the furnace room, though I could see that he staggered a little from weakness. It was no small job getting him down that pole. He was too weak to climb down himself, so I had practically to carry him. But at last we were in the boat. I lowered the pole into the water and pushed off. We paddled all the way to the mouth of the harbour, as otherwise we would have had to tack back and forth several times to have made it, and I was afraid the sail might attract attention from the shore. Had it, a launch must certainly have overhauled us before we could get out into the open sea. But at last we turned the headland, and Yulin hoisted the sail. Then it was that I thought to do a very foolish thing. Once I had stopped and seen Zerka while I was escaping from Amlot. It had seemed very simple and quite safe. Conditions of tide and wind were again favorable. Why not do it again? I might obtain information that would be of value to my friends at Sonara. I told Yulin and Mintep what I intended doing. It was not for them to question my judgment, so they concurred. It was the first time that we had dared speak, so fearful had we been of discovery, knowing, as we did, how the sound of voices carries over water. "Who are you?" asked Mintep. "Do you recall the prison officer who sang a song to you?" I asked. "But he was a Zani," said Mintep. "Only posing as a Zani to find you," I told him. "But who are you?" he insisted. "For some time I was a guest prisoner in your palace at Kuard," I said. "I am the stranger called Carson." "Carson," he exclaimed. "When Camlot returned to Kuard, he told me of all that you had done to serve my daughter, Duer. And now you say she is safe and waiting for me." "Yes, in 2 or 3 hours you shall see her." "And you have done all this for me?" he asked. "For Duer," I said, simply. He made no comment on the correction, and we sailed on in silence again until we came opposite the palace of Zerka. Then I turned the boat's nose in toward shore. Alas, what stupid things one does! The palace was lighted much as I had last seen it. All seemed quiet and peaceful. I hoped Zerka would be alone. I wanted only a few swift words with her. "Stay in the boat," I told Yulin, "and be ready to push off on an instant's notice." Then I walked up the garden to the great doors that open onto the terrace. I paused and listened, but I could hear nothing. Then I whistled and waited. I did not have to wait long. I heard the sound of men running, but the sounds did not come from the house, they came from the garden behind me. I wheeled, and in the light from the palace windows I saw a dozen Zani guardsmen running toward me. "Shove off, Yulin!" I cried at the top of my voice. "Shove off, and take Mintep to Duer!" I command it. Then they were upon me. At the sound of my voice the great doors swung open, and I saw more Zani uniforms in the great hall of the palace of the Taganja Zerka. They dragged me in, and when I was recognized a sullen murmur filled the room. 15. Tragic error. There is nothing more annoying than to commit an egregious error of judgment and have no one but yourself upon whom to blame it. As I was dragged into that room, I was annoyed. I was more than annoyed, I was frightened, for I saw certain death staring me in the face. And not death alone, for I remembered Navon. I wondered if I would go to pieces, too. And there was some reason for my apprehension, for besides a company of Zani guardsmen and officers, there were a number of the great men of Zanism. There were even Mephis and Spihan themselves. And to one side, their wrists manacled, stood Zerka and Mantar. There was an expression almost of anguish in Zerka's eyes as they met mine. Mantar shook his head sadly, as though to say, "You poor fool, why did you stick your head into the noose again?" "So you came back," rasped Mephis. "Don't you think that was a little unwise, a little stupid?" "Let us say unfortunate, Mephis," I replied. "Unfortunate for you." "Why unfortunate for me?" he demanded, almost angrily. I could see that he was nervous. I knew that he was always fearful. "Unfortunate, because you would like to kill me, but if you harm me in any way or harm the Taganja Zerka or Mantar, you shall die shortly after dawn." "You dare threaten me," he roared. "You stinking Mistal. You dare threaten the great Mephis. Off to the gap, come off with him, with all of them. Let Torko do his worst with them. I want to see them writhe. I want to hear them scream." "Wait a minute, Mephis," I advised him. "I wasn't threatening you. I was merely stating facts. I know what I'm talking about, for I have given orders that I know will be carried out if I am not safely out of Amlot shortly after dawn." You lie, he almost screamed. I shrugged. If I were you, though, I'd give instructions that none of us is to be tortured or harmed in any way until at least the 3rd hour tomorrow, and be sure to have a boat ready that I and my friends can sail away in after you have released us. I shall never release you, he said, but nevertheless he gave instructions that we were not to be tortured or harmed until he gave further orders. And so Zerka and Mantar and I were dragged away to the Gap Kumrov. They didn't abuse us, and they even took the manacles off Zerka and Mantar. They put us all together in a cell on the 2nd floor, which surprised me, as the basement was reserved for Mephis's special hates as well as prisoners concerning whose incarceration he would rather not have too much known. Why did you do such a foolish thing as to come back, asked Zerka, after we had been left alone. And right after I risked my life to get you out of here, said Mantar, laughingly. Well, I explained, I wanted to see Zerka and find out if there is any way in which the loyal forces at Sonara may cooperate with you. They could, she said, but now they'll never know. We need more weapons, you might have brought them in that flying boat you have told me about. I may yet, I assured her. Have you gone crazy? She demanded. Don't you know, regardless of that courageous bluff you tried to pull, that we are all lost, that we shall be tortured and killed, probably today? No, I said. I know we may, but not that we shall. I was pulling no bluff. I meant what I said. But tell me, what caused them to arrest you and Mantar? It was the culmination of growing suspicion on the part of Spihan, explained Zerka. My friendship for you had something to do with it, and after Horjan informed on you and you escaped from the city, Spihan, in checking over all your connections, recalled this friendship and also the fact that Mantar and you were close friends and that Mantar was my friend. One of the soldiers in the detail that Mantar commanded the evening that he met you and let you proceed to the key reported to Spihan that he thought your description, which he heard after he returned to the barracks, fitted the man with whom Mantar had talked. Then, these things having suggested my connection with you, Spihan recalled Narvan's last words, the same words that assured you that I was one of those who conspired with Narvan against the Zanis. So, all in all, they had a much clearer case against me than the Zanis ordinarily require, but Mephis would not believe that I had conspired against him. He is such an egotistical fool that he thought that my affection for him assured my loyalty. I was, until recently, in a quandary as to your exact sentiments and your loyalties, I said. I was told that you were high in the esteem of Mephis, that you were the author of the Multu Mephis, gesture of adulation, that it was you who suggested having citizens stand on their heads while they cheered Mephis, that it was your idea to have the life of our beloved Mephis run continuously in all theatres, and to have Zani guardsmen annoy and assault citizens continually. Zerka laughed. You were correctly informed, she said. I was the instigator of those and other schemes for making Zainism obnoxious and ridiculous in the eyes of the citizens of Amlot, so that it might be easier to recruit members for our counter-revolution. So stupidly egotistical are the chief Zanis, they will swallow almost any form of flattery, however ridiculous and insincere it may be. While we were talking, Torko came stamping up the stairs to our cell. He had been absent from the prison when we were brought in. He wore one of his most fearsome frowns, but I could see he was delighted with the prospect of baiting and doubtless torturing such important prisoners as we. He stood and glowered at us a moment before he spoke. It was so evident that he was trying to impress and frighten us that I couldn't restrain a desire to laugh. Well, perhaps I didn't try very hard. I knew how to bait such creatures as Torko. I also knew that no matter what attitude we assumed toward him he would give us the works, so to speak, the moment he was given the opportunity. What are you laughing at? He demanded. I wasn't laughing before you came up, Torko, so I must be laughing at you. Laughing at me, are you, you stinking mistal, he bellowed. Well, you won't laugh when I get you in the courtroom tomorrow morning. You won't get me into the courtroom tomorrow morning, Torko, and even if I am there, you won't be. You'll be in one of these cells, and then, later, you'll have an opportunity to discover how effective are the ingenious devices for torture you bragged of having invented. Zerka and Mantar looked their astonishment, the former smiling a little because she thought I was bluffing again. Torko stood there fairly boiling. "I've a good mind to take you down there now," he threatened, "and get out of you what you mean by such talk." "You wouldn't dare do that, Torko," I told him. "You already have your orders about us. And anyway, you don't have to. I'll tell you without being tortured. It's like this. Mephis is going to be angry with you when I tell him you offered to give me liberties while I was stationed here if I would speak a good word about you to the Tagangja Zerka, that she might carry it to him. He won't like it when he learns that you let me go fishing whenever I wanted to and thus permitted me to pave the way for my escape by boat. And, Torko, there is another thing that is going to make him so furious that, well, I just don't know what he will do to you when he discovers it." Torko was commencing to look uncomfortable, but he came right through with the same argument that even great statesmen of our own earth use when they're caught red-handed. "They are a pack of lies," he yelled. "He won't think so when he learns about the other thing you have done, something that he can see with his own eyes," I baited him. "What's the other lie?" he demanded, his curiosity and fear getting the better of him. "Oh, just that you unlocked the cell of Mintep, Jong of Vapaja, and let him escape," I said. "That is a lie," he cried. "Well, go and look for yourself," I suggested. "If he's gone, who else could have unlocked his cell? You have the only keys." "He's not gone," he said, but he turned and ran down the stairs as fast as he could go. "You seem to be having a good time," said Mantar, "and we might as well have all the fun we can while we may. It's not going to be so funny when morning comes, not for us." "On the contrary," I objected, "that may be the most amusing time of all." "I am amused now," said Zerka. "How furious Torko will be when he discovers that you have hoaxed him into running all the way down to the basement." "But it is not a hoax," I said. "He will find Mintep's cell door open and Mintep gone." "How can you possibly know that?" demanded Zerka. "Because I released Mintep myself, and he is on his way to safety right now." "But how could you enter the Gap Komrov and take a prisoner out under the noses of the Zani guard?" demanded Zerka. "Why, it is simply impossible. You couldn't have even unlocked his cell if you had managed to get into the prison, which, in itself, would have been impossible." I had to smile. "But I did," I said, "and it was very easy." "Would you mind very much telling me how you did it?" she asked. "Not at all," I assured her. "In the first place, I secured a duplicate master key to all the locks of Gap Komrov while I was stationed here. Last night I came in a boat to the side of the prison and entered it through the chute that discharges the ashes from the furnace into the bay. I brought Mintep out the same way." Mantar and Zerka shook their heads in astonishment. It could not have seemed possible to many inhabitants of Amlot that a prisoner might escape from the Gap Komrov, for few of them knew anything about the prison except that no prisoner had ever escaped from it. "And you have a master key to the locks?" asked Mantar. I took it from my pocket pouch. "Here it is," I said. "If they had confined us in the basement, we might have escaped easily, at least as far as the waters of the bay, but with a guard watching constantly on the floor below there is no chance from here." "But aren't you afraid they'll find the key on you?" asked Zerka. "Yes, of course, but what can I do about it? I have no place to hide it. I shall simply have to take the chance that they won't search me, they are so stupid. Anyway, unless they confine us in the basement, it cannot possibly be of any use to us. Furthermore, I have an idea that we'll walk out of here without any need of a key." "You are very optimistic," said Mantar, "but I can't see upon what food your optimism thrives." "Wait for dawn," I counseled. "Listen," said Zerka. From below we heard Torko's voice bellowing orders. Guards were running to and fro. They were searching the prison for Mintep. When they reached our floor, they entered every cell and searched it carefully, although they could have seen the whole interior of each of them from the corridor. Torko's face was drawn and pale. He looked to me like a broken man. When he reached our cell, he was trembling, as much, I think, from fright as from rage. "What have you done with him?" he demanded. I asked in feigned astonishment. Now, how could I have gotten into this impregnable prison, so ably guarded by the great Torko, unless with the connivance of Torko? Mephis will be sure to ask that very question. "Listen," Torko said, coming close and whispering. "I was good to you when you were here. Do not send me to my death. Do not tell Mephis that Mintep has escaped. If he is not told, he may never know it. The chances are he has forgotten all about Mintep by this time. If you do not tell him, I promise not to torture you and your accomplices unless I am forced to, and then I'll make it as easy as I can." "If you do torture us, I'll certainly tell him," I replied. I certainly had Torko over a barrel. Torko scratched his head in thought for a moment. "Say," he said at last, "of course you couldn't have let him out, but how in the world did you know he was gone?" "I'm psychic, Torko," I told him. "I even know things are going to happen before they do." "What is the hour?" He looked at me rather fearfully as he replied. "It is the first hour," he said. "Why?" "Presently you shall hear a great noise in the direction of the palace of Mephis," I said, "and then word will pass around that death and destruction are raining upon the Zanis from the sky because they hold me and my friends prisoners in Gap Kumrov. When Mephis sets us free, it shall stop." "Rubbish," said Torko, and went on to search other cells for Mintep, John of Vapaja. He didn't find him. Time dragged leadenly after dawn crept slowly out of the east and its light sought to penetrate the dirty windows of the Gap Kumrov. I was tense from waiting for the first detonation of a bomb. The second hour came and then the third, yet still nothing had happened. What could the reason be? Had disaster overtaken Duet? I imagined 100 terrible things that might have happened. A crack-up at the takeoff seemed the most likely. I was still worrying when Torko came with a detail of the guard and took us down to the courtroom. There were Mephis, Spihan, and a number of other high Zanis. We were lined up before them. They glowered at us like ogres out of a fairy tale. "It is the third hour," said Mephis. "I have waited, and because you have made me wait it shall go the harder for you. If any of you expect any mercy you will name all your accomplices in the low plot you have fostered to overthrow the state. Torko, take the woman first. We'll make her talk, and I'll save you for the last. Take that thing off his head, Torko." He pointed at me. I looked at Torko, as he took off my flying helmet and threw it into a corner. The sweat was pouring down his face, although it was not hot. "Do not forget, Torko," I whispered. "Mercy," he pleaded. "I must obey orders." They laid Zerka upon a hideous thing that would have crushed her slowly, inch by inch, starting at her toes, and they brought a brazier containing a pot of molten metal and set it down on a table beside her. It was not difficult to guess how they intended to use it. I turned my head, for I could not look at the frightful thing they contemplated. "Do you wish to confess?" asked Mephis. "No," replied Zerka in a firm voice. "Have you anything to say?" he inquired. "Yes, this. I joined the Zani party because I had learned that you tortured and murdered my man. I joined to undermine it, and for another, greater purpose, to kill you." Mephis laughed. "And this is the way you kill me," he taunted. "No, not this way, nor the way I had hoped, but the only way I could find," replied Zerka. "What do you mean?" demanded Mephis. "I mean that I have avenged my husband, but you did not know it. Know it now, then. Before another day has passed, you will be dead." "And how, please, am I to die at the hand of a dead woman?" jeered Mephis. You ate food in my home last night, Memphis. Do you recall? That food was poisoned. I have kept it there for a long time to cheat you of the pleasure of killing me, were I caught. Last night I had the opportunity one had never hoped for of letting you eat it instead. At any moment, now, you will die certainly before another day has passed. The face of Memphis turned livid. He tried to speak, but no words came to his white lips. He rose and pointed at Torco. He was trying to order the torture to proceed. Torco looked at me and trembled. The other Zanis were staring at Memphis. Then, close by, came a shattering detonation that shook the walls of Gap Kumrov. Duer had come. But she was bombing the prison instead of the palace. She must have mistaken the one for the other. It was possible. I warned you. I shouted. The city will be destroyed if you don't set us free and give us a boat. Never, cried Memphis. Destroy them all. Then he gasped, clutched his throat, and fell forward across the bench. The Zanis rushed forward, surrounding him. Another bomb burst so close that I was certain that it had struck the building. It threw us all to the floor. Spihan was the first to his feet. Memphis is dead, he cried. Spihan is ruler of Korva. Moltu Spihan, shouted the assembled Zanis. Then a bomb exploded in the rear of the building, and again we were all thrown to the floor. Get them out of here, screamed Spihan. Get them a boat. Hurry. Well, they got us out of there in short order, but we were far from safe. Bombs kept bursting all around us. In the sky above, I saw the Anotar circling like a great bird of prey, yet it looked sweet to me. They hurried us to a safer part of the bayside and found us a boat, a fair-size fishing boat with 2 sails, then they hustled us into it. We made sail quickly and started tacking for the harbor entrance, and as we moved slowly away from shore, I saw the Anotar drop in a graceful spiral toward us. Duer was coming to make sure that it was I. She didn't drop far enough to be in range of any RA or T-ray guns they might have trained on the ship, for I had warned her against this. She circled us a few times, and then flew back over the city. I wondered why she didn't follow us out to sea and pick us up. We were about the center of the harbor when I heard another bomb explode. In rapid succession 5 more fell. It was then that I guessed the truth. Duer had not recognized me. She must naturally have expected to see a man alone in a boat, a man wearing a flying helmet. Instead she had seen 2 men and a woman, and both men sported the Zani coiffure. Briefly I explained our situation to Zerka and Mantar. It seemed almost hopeless. We could not return to shore because the Zanis would be furious at the continued bombing which I had promised them would stop if they set us free. If we waited around in the harbor on the chance that Duer might circle above us again and give me an opportunity to signal her, it was almost certain that the Zanis would send a launch out to recapture us. Perhaps, I suggested, Duer may take another look, even out at sea. Suppose we round the headland and wait out of sight of the city? They both agreed that it would do no harm, and so I sailed the boat well out beyond the mouth of the harbor, where we would be hidden from the city by the headland. From that position we could see the Anotar circling high over Amlot, and from time to time we heard the booming detonations of her bombs. Late in the afternoon we saw her turn her nose northeast in the direction of Sonara, and in a few minutes she was out of sight. 16. Despair. For a few minutes I plumbed the depths of despair, and then I thought of the torture chamber and how much worse things might have been for us, especially for Zerka and Mantar. Had I not stopped at her palace the night before, both of them would now be dead. They must have been thinking this same thing, too, for they were very gay and happy. Yet our position was far from being an enviable one. We were without food, water, or weapons, in a none too substantial boat, off an enemy shore, and Sonara was 500 miles away and possibly in the hands of another enemy. But worst of all, for me, Duer was in equal danger. She would not dare return to Sonara until she knew that Muso had been deposed. If he were never deposed, what was she to do? Where could she go? And all the time she must be thinking that I was dead. I was that much better off, at least, I was sure she lived. Of course, she had her father, but I knew that would scarcely compensate for the loss of the man she loved, nor would her father be able to protect her as well as I. He would have been all right as a protector back in his own kingdom, with his warriors and his other loyal subjects about him, but I had learned to take care of Due under conditions far different. Of course, I hadn't always made such a good job of it, but in the end, I had come through all right. As the Ainotar disappeared in the distance, I made sail again and turned up the coast in the direction of Sonara. "Where are we going?" asked Zerka. I told her. She nodded in approval. "I only asked out of curiosity," she said. "Wherever you wish to go suits me. Thanks to you, we are alive. We can ask no more." "Perhaps we are as well off anyway," I said. It might have been pretty nearly impossible to crowd 7 people into the Ainotar. We sailed up the coast all that night under a fresh breeze, and in the morning I came in close and we watched for signs of fresh water. At last we saw a stream falling over a low cliff into the ocean, and I made for a strip of yellow sand where a long, low surf broke lazily. We were all suffering from thirst, which is the only excuse I had for landing in such a spot. Fortunately the boat drew little water, and we were able to paddle it into a point where we could wade. I held it there, while Zerka and Mantar slaked their thirst, then I went and drank my fill. We had nothing in which to carry water, so we put off again immediately, hoping we might find a more suitable spot where we might make a temporary camp and endeavor to improvise some sort of equipment. About the middle of the day, we found such a place, a little cove into which a stream of fresh water emptied, and about which grew a variety of trees and plants. Among the latter was a huge arborescent grass nearly a foot in diameter, with hard, smooth outer wood and a pithy core. We managed to break one of these down, and, after building a fire, we burned out one section. The sections were formed by well-marked joints or nodes, at which the inner cavity was closed by a strong diaphragm. Our efforts resulted in a receptacle about 3 feet high and a foot in diameter, in which we could carry fresh water. So successful was this first attempt that we made 2 more of them. In the wood we found nuts and fruits, so that now all we lacked were weapons. If we had had a knife we might have fulfilled this want, as we could have made bows, arrows, and spears from the hard, outer wood of this bamboo-like plant. Mantar and I discussed this most important matter, for we knew that if we were ever compelled to remain on shore for any length of time we might need weapons sorely. We certainly should, if we were to have meat to eat. We searched the beach together, and finally found several pieces of sharp-edged stones and shells. With this meager encouragement, we decided to camp where we were until we had contrived some sort of weapons. I shall not bore you with a recital of our methods. Suffice it to say that our technique was wholly primitive, but with fire and using our sharp-edged tools as wedges and scrapers, we managed to hack out spears, bows, arrows, and sharp-pointed wooden knives. We also made 2 long harpoons for spearing fish. Then, with a supply of fresh water and quantities of nuts and tubers, we set out again upon our long journey towards Sonara. Fortune favored us, for the wind held, and though we had a few stiff blows, the seas were never such as we could not weather. This was fortunate for us, as we did not want to be forced ashore if we could avoid it. We often ran rather close in, and at such times it was not unusual for us to see savage beasts along the shore. No monsters of the sea attacked us. In fact, we saw but a couple that might have proved dangerous, and we left these strictly alone. With our harpoons we were able to vary our diet of nuts and tubers with excellent fish, which we ran ashore and cooked as quickly as we could find a suitable place after catching them. Had I not had my mind filled almost entirely with thoughts of Due and worries concerning her, I might have enjoyed this adventure exceedingly, but as it was I chafed at every delay, even to the point of begrudging the time it took to cook food or take on fresh water. On the night of the 6th day out, we were sailing smoothly along a low coast, when I saw clearly in the night sky the flare of a blue rocket against the lower surface of the inner cloud envelope. It was followed in a moment by another and then another. The enemy was springing the trap that was to snare Muso. I wondered if this were the first, the second, or the third night. We might have been too far away before this to have seen them. It made no difference, as it might be 2 more days before we could hope to reach the coast near Sonara. The next night we watched for a repetition of the rockets, the purpose of which I had explained to Zerka and Mantar, but nothing rewarded our vigil, and I was of the opinion that last night's rockets had completed the series of 3 nightly for 3 nights and that tonight Muso would walk into the trap that I had prepared for him. How I wished that I might be there to witness his undoing. And now we encountered storms. The next day we were driven ashore by a wind of almost hurricane velocity. We managed to find a sheltered bay, and here we anchored, safe from the storm as well as from wild beasts and savage men. For 3 days we were stormbound, and Sonara only 1 day's sail away. The delay was maddening, but there was nothing that we could do about it. Man-made obstacles we might overcome, but not those interposed by the elements. During our enforced wait, we speculated upon our chances of gaining entry into Sonara through the Zani lines which encircled the city, and we were all forced to admit that they seemed rather remote, as, by all means, we must avoid being recaptured by the Zanis, so here was a man-made obstacle quite as difficult of negotiation as any that the elements might raise. It appeared that we were stymied. However, we must go on, hoping for some fortuitous circumstance that would solve our difficulty. In the evening of the 3rd day, the storm suddenly abated, and, though the seas were still running high, we put out from our little harbour and set our course once more for Sonara. Perhaps it was a foolhardy thing to do, but the enforced delay and my anxiety to reach Sonara and be reunited with Duer had rendered me temerarious. The seas were like a great, grey army rushing, battalion after battalion, in their assault upon the shore, and we a tiny Argo between the Charybdis of the one and the Scylla of the other. Yet we came through without mishap, and dawn found us off the mouth of the river upon which Sonara lies a few miles from the coast. "And now what are we to do?" asked Zerka. I shook my head in despair. "Pray to Lady Luck," I said. "The only plan that I can suggest that seems to contain even a germ of success," said Mantar, "is for me to get through the Zani lines at night and seek admission to the city. I am well known to many of the nobility and high officials. They would accept and believe me, and I should be safe even though Muso was still Jong, which would not hold true with you, Carson. Once inside the city, it would be easy to arrange for your princess to fly out and pick up Zerka and you." "If she is there," I amended. "If Muso is still Jong, she is not there." "That is what I must ascertain," he replied. "And what of Zerka?" I asked. "If you are in the city and Muso is Jong, I cannot come in, then how shall we get Zerka in?" "I shall be content to remain with you, Carson, so don't give me a thought," said Zerka. "Whatever we do can't be done until after dark," I said, "so we shall have to cruise around until then. Maybe in the meantime we shall have evolved a better plan than Mantar's, which I do not like because it subjects him to too much risk." It was very monotonous, cruising aimlessly about, and very tantalizing to be so near our goal and yet so far from reaching it. The seas had gone down, but enormous ground swells alternately lifted us to high crests and dropped us into deep hollows. Fishes swarmed about us, the sea was alive with them, and now and again some great monster of the deep passed close, like a giant submarine, as it voraciously gobbled the lesser creatures in its path. About the 8th hour Zerka voiced an exclamation of excitement and pointed toward the city, and as I looked, I saw the Aenotar above Sonara. It was evident that she had just risen from the city. That could mean but one thing to me: no, to the first, that Duer lived, the second, that Muso no longer ruled as Jong, for no one but Duer could fly the ship, and she would not have been in Sonara had Muso ruled the city. As we watched, we saw that the plane was heading in our direction and we prepared to try to attract Duer's attention to us. I lowered the sails, lest it hide our efforts, and then I put one of our improvised water containers upside down over the end of the harpoon. As the ship approached, Mantar and I waved the crude signal back and forth. From the time that she had left the city, Duer had been climbing, and had gained considerable altitude by the time she passed over us. We must have appeared very small to her. Perhaps she did not see us at all. She certainly gave no indication of it. I wondered why she was flying out over the ocean, and waited for her to circle back, hoping for better luck with our signaling next time. But she did not circle back, she continued straight upon her course into the southeast. In utter silence we watched until the ship became a little speck in the distance and finally disappeared. My heart sank, for I knew the truth. Duer thought me dead and was flying back to Vapaja with her father. I should never see her again, for how could I reach Vapaja? And what would it avail me were I to? Mintep would have me destroyed before I could even so much as see my Duer. I was utterly unnerved as I sat there staring out across that lonely ocean after my lost love. I must have looked the picture of dejection that I felt. Zerka placed a hand upon mine. It was a gesture of sympathy and friendship which would have been negatived by words. Presently I hoisted the sails again and headed in for shore. As we approached it, and it became evident that I was going to enter the mouth of the river, Mantar spoke. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I am going through the Zani lines and up to the city," I replied. "Have you gone mad?" he demanded. "At night you might stand a chance of getting through, but in broad daylight, none. You'll be arrested, and even if no one at the front recognizes you, there'll be plenty in Amlot, where you'll surely be sent." "I'll get through," I said, "or I won't, but I'll not go back to Amlot." "You're desperate now, Carson," said Zerka. "Don't throw your life away uselessly. There may be happiness for you yet. Why, your princess may even return from Vapaja." "No," I said, "once she is there they will never permit her to leave again." I ran the boat close to the river bank and leaped ashore. "Cruise around close by," I called to Mantar. "I'll get word to you, if it's humanly possible. Watch the city. If you see balloons go up by day or rockets by night, you'll know I've won through and that plans are being made to bring you and Zerka in. Goodbye." I had run the boat quite a distance up the river before landing, so the city was not far away as I set out on foot toward it. I made no effort to conceal myself, but walked boldly toward my goal. I should have been close behind the Zani lines, but I saw no sign of troops nor of any engines of war. Presently I came to where the Zanis had lain for so many months. The ground was littered with the rubbish of war. There were a few dead men lying where they had fallen, but no living thing was visible between me and the city. The siege had been raised, the Zanis were gone. I turned and almost ran back to the river. Mantar and Zerka were drifting slowly down the stream toward the ocean. I shouted to them and beckoned them to return, and when they were within reach of my voice I told them that the Zanis had gone and that nothing lay between us and the city. They could scarcely believe the good news, and when they had taken me aboard, we sailed up the river toward Sanara. About a quarter of a mile from the city we came ashore and walked toward the nearest gate. From the city walls a number of warriors were watching us, and, I presume, with a great deal of suspicion, since Mantar and I still wore the Zani hairdress and apparel. As we came closer to the gate, Mantar and I made the sign of peace, and as we stopped before it an officer hailed us. "Ho, Zanis! What do you want at Sanara? To be shot as traitors?" "We are not Zanis," I replied. "We want word with Tarmin." "So," he laughed, "you are not Zanis?" "Oh, no, not at all. Do you think we of Sanara do not know Zanis when we see them?" "I am Carson of Venus," I said. "Tell that to Tarmin." At that he left the wall, and presently the gate swung open a little way, and he came out with a few warriors to have a closer look at us. As he did so, I recognized him, and he me. He was one of the officers who had flown with me on one of the occasions that I had bombed the Zani camp. I introduced him to Zerka and Mantar, for whom I vouched, and he told us to enter the city and that he would escort us personally to Tarman. "One question," I said, "before I come into Sonara." "And what is that?" he asked. "Is Muso still Jong?" He smiled. "I can understand that you might wish to know that," he said, "but I can assure you that Muso is no longer Jong. The High Council deposed him and created Tarman Jong." It was with a feeling of relief that I re-entered the city of Sonara after the trying weeks of danger and uncertainty through which I had passed, and during which I had never known of any place upon this strange planet where I might abide in safety, not in Kuard, where even my best friends would have been in duty bound to have killed me because I had dared love their princess and she me, not in Capta, the Thorist city of Nubal, where they had placed me in the room of the 7 doors from which no man before had escaped alive, not in Korma, Score city of the dead, from which I had stolen Duer and Naughty from Underscore's nose in his own palace, not in Havatu, that utopian city on the banks of the river of death, from which I had rescued Duer from an inexplicable miscarriage of justice, not in Amlot, where the followers of Spihan would have torn me limb from limb. There was only Sonara. Had Muso still been Jong here, I should have been doomed to wander on in hopeless loneliness. At last I had a city I might call my own, where I might establish a home and live in peace and contentment, but there was only relief, not joy, in contemplation of the fact, because Duer was not there to share it with me. So I re-entered Sonara in sorrow, and in the howdah of a great military ganta we were escorted through the avenues toward the palace of Tarman. It was well, too, that we had a strong military escort, for the people who saw us pass thought that we were Zani prisoners, and would have made quick work of us had it not been for the soldiers. Even to the very gates of the palace of the Jong they followed us, booing and cursing and flinging insults at us. The officer who escorted us tried to tell them that we were not Zanis, but his voice was drowned in the tumult. 40 minutes. When word was taken to Tarman that I had returned to Sonara, he had us brought to him at once. He had known the Tiganja Zerka well in Amlot, and after he had listened to her story he promised that both she and Mantar should be rewarded for the hazardous work they had performed in the stronghold of the Zanis. Upon me he conferred nobility, promising me palaces and land also as soon as the seat of government should have been re-established in Amlot. When he learned of the attitude of the Sanarans toward us because of our Zani appearance, he ordered black wigs for Mantar and me and new apparel for all of us. Then he turned Zerka and Mantar over to members of his household staff and took me to see Jahara, his queen. I knew that he wanted to talk to me in private and tell me about Duer, the one subject uppermost in my mind but of which neither of us had spoken. The little Princess Na was with her mother when we entered the apartments of the queen, and they both welcomed me with great cordiality and real friendship. Fortunately for Na, she was not fettered by the ridiculous customs of Vapaja that had made of Duer a virtual prisoner in her own apartments in her father's palace, but could mingle as freely with the court as other members of the royal family. She was a sweet young girl and the pride of Tarman and Jahara. Shortly after I was received by the latter, Na was taken away by a lady-in-waiting, and I was not to see her again until after a harrowing episode and a dangerous adventure. As soon as Tarman, Jahara, and I were alone I turned to the former. "Tell me about Duer," I begged. "I saw the Ainotar leave Sonara this morning and head out over the ocean. No one but Duer could have been at the controls, for only she and I know how to fly the ship." "You are right," he replied, "it was Duer." "And she was flying her father back to Vapaja?" I asked. "Yes. Mintep practically forced her to do so. She had not given up hope that you might be alive, and she wanted to remain. She was planning on flying back to Amlot with more bombs and a message that she would continue to bomb the city until you were released, but Mintep would not let her do so. He swore that if you did live, he would kill you on sight, for while, as a father, he owed you a debt of gratitude for all that you had done for his daughter, as Jong of Vapaja he must destroy you for having dared to love his daughter and take her as your mate. Finally he commanded her to return to Vapaja with him and stand trial before the nobles of Kuard for having broken one of the oldest taboos of Vapaja. That may mean death for her, I said. Yes, she realized that, and so did Mintep, but the dynastic customs and laws of Vapaja are so ingrained in every fiber of their beings that, to them, it was almost unthinkable to attempt to evade them. Duer would have had she known that you lived. She told me that, and she also told me that she would return to Vapaja willingly because she preferred death to life without you. I do not know what Mintep would have done had she refused to return to Kuard, but I think he would have killed her with his own hands, notwithstanding the fact that he loved her. I was, however, prepared for such an eventuality, and I should have protected Duer even to the extent of imprisoning Mintep. I can tell you that we were all in a most unhappy situation. I never before saw a man of such unquestioned intelligence so fanatical as Mintep, but on this one subject only. Otherwise he seemed perfectly normal and lavished upon Duer all the love of a devoted father. I have often wondered what he would have done if Duer had found you at Amlot. I can't imagine him in the Ainotar with you. But, tell me, what went wrong with your plans? Duer said that you did not put off from the city in a boat as you should have done were you released. I put off just as had been planned, but I had Zerka and Mantar with me, and Duer would have been looking for a lone man in a boat. Also, my flying helmet had been taken from me in the courtroom of the prison, so there was nothing by which she could identify me. We must have looked like three Zanis to her. Then she saw you, said Tarman, for she told me that she saw three Zanis put off into the harbour. When you did not come as she had hoped, she assumed that the Zanis had killed you, and she bombed the city until she had exhausted her supply of bombs. Then she flew back with Mintep, Yulin, and Ligan, and remained in the vicinity of Sonara for several days until we sent up 3 balloons to indicate that it was safe for you to enter Sonara. Of course, at that time, we did not know that you were not in the ship. And what of Muso? I was told at the gate that he had been deposed. Yes, and imprisoned, replied Tarman, but he has a number of followers whose lives will not be safe in Corva now that Muso is no longer Jong. They are desperate. Last night they succeeded in liberating Muso from prison, and he is hiding now somewhere in the city. We do not believe that he has been able to leave Sonara as yet, though that is his plan. He believes that if he can reach Amlot, the Zanis will make him Jong, but he does not know what we know, that Memphis is dead and that after his death the counter-revolutionists struck and completely routed the Zani overlords, of whom the people, including the majority who claimed to be Zanis, were heartily sick. The word must have reached the troops before Sonara yesterday morning, for it was then that they evacuated their positions and started on the long march back toward Amlot. Then the long civil war is over, I said. Yes, replied Tarman, and I hope soon to re-establish the capital at Amlot. I have already sent word that I would extend amnesty to all except ringleaders and those whose acts have been definitely criminal. I expect to follow my messenger in person in a few days with a powerful army. And, my friend, I hope that you will accompany me and receive in my capital the honors that are your due. I shook my head. Do not think that I don't appreciate your generosity, I said, but I think you will understand that they would be empty honors indeed without my princess to share them. But why not? He urged. You must live, and here you may live in comfort and in honor. What other plans may you have? I am going to follow Duer to Vapaja. Impossible, he exclaimed. How can you hope to reach Vapaja? Every Corvan vessel was taken or destroyed by the enemy during the last war. I have a boat that brought me safely from Amlot, I reminded him. What is it? A fishing boat, he demanded. Yes. A mere cockleshell, he cried. You would not last through the first storm. Nevertheless, I shall make the attempt, I said. He shook his head sadly. I wish that I might dissuade you, he said, not alone because of my friendship for you, but because you could be of such great value to Corva. How? I asked. By showing us how to build anatars and training my officers to fly them. The temptation is great, I admitted, but I shall never rest in peace until I know that I have done all that man can do to rescue Duer. Well, you can't leave at once, so we shall make the most of the time that you are with us, and I shall not annoy you with further importunities. He called an aide then, and had me shown to the quarters he had assigned me. There I found new apparel and a black wig, and after a hot bath I felt like a new man, and looked like one, too, as my mirror revealed in a startling manner. I should not have known myself, so greatly did the wig change my appearance. Zerka, Mantar, and I dined that night in the great banquet hall of the Zhong's palace with Tarman and Jahara and a company of the great nobles of Korva. They had all known me, some of them quite well, but they all agreed that they would never have recognized me. This, I realized, was not entirely due to the black wig. I had lost considerable weight during my hazardous adventures in Amlot, and I had undergone considerable mental suffering, with the result that my face was haggard and lined, my cheeks sunken. During the long dinner, we three from Amlot fairly monopolized the conversation, but not through any desire on our part. The other guests insisted upon hearing every detail of what we had observed there and what we had experienced. They were especially interested in Zerka's description of the devious methods whereby the counter-revolutionists had carried on their operations despite the highly organized Zani spy system and the ruthless extermination of all who became suspected. They were still listening to her, spellbound, when a highly agitated aide entered the banquet hall and approached Tarman. As he whispered in the Zhong's ear, I saw the latter turn suddenly pale, then he rose and, taking Jahara's hand, led her from the hall. While the Zhong's departure left us free to depart if we wished, no one did so. We all felt that Tarman was in trouble, and I think that as one man our only thought was to remain, in the event that we might be of service to our Zhong. We were right, for presently the aide returned and asked us to remain until Tarman could speak with us. A few moments later he returned to the banquet hall, and, standing at the head of the long table, spoke to us. In this hall, he said, are many of my most loyal subjects and trusted friends. I have come to you in a moment of great trouble to ask your aid. The Janjongna has been abducted from the palace. An involuntary exclamation of shock and sorrow filled the great room. She was taken with the connivance of someone in the palace, continued Tarman, but not before 2 loyal guardsmen had been killed attempting to defend her. That is all I know. A voice murmured, Muso. It reflected the thought in every mind, and just then an officer hurried into the hall and up to Tarman, handing him a message. This was just found in the Janjong's apartment, said the officer. Tarman read the message through, then he looked up at us. You were right, he said. It was Muso. This is a threat to kill No unless I abdicate in favor of Muso and swear allegiance to him. We all stood there voiceless. What was there to say? Could we advise a father to sacrifice a loved daughter? Could we permit Muso to become Zhong of Korva? We were upon the horns of a dilemma. Does the message state any time when your decision must be reached? Asked Vero, the general. Tarman nodded. Between the 1st and 2nd hours in the morning I must send up balloons from the palace roof, 1, if I refuse, 2, if I accede. It is now the 26th hour, said Vero. We have 11 hours in which to work. In the meantime, Tarman, I beg that you refrain from making any reply. Let us see what we can accomplish. I shall leave the matter in your hands, Vero, said Tarman, until the 1st hour tomorrow. Keep me advised of any progress, but please do not jeopardize the life of my daughter. Her safety shall be our first concern, Vero assured the Zhong. Tarman sat with us while we discussed plans. There seemed nothing more practical than a thorough search of the city, and Vero issued orders that routed out every soldier in Sonara to prosecute such a search as few cities ever have been subjected to. I asked permission to join the searchers, and when Vero granted it I went at once to my quarters and summoned the servant who had been detailed to attend me. When he came I asked him if he could quickly procure for me the apparel such as a poor man might wear, but one who might also reasonably carry a sword and pistol. "That will be easy, sir," he said. "I have only to go to my own quarters and fetch the apparel that I wear when I am not in the livery of the Zhong's household." In 10 minutes I was attired in the clothing of an ordinary citizen of the lower class, and was soon on the street. I had a plan, not a very brilliant one but the best I could think of. I knew some rather disreputable haunts of the underworld of Sonara where men might foregather who could be bribed to commit any crime however heinous, and it occurred to me that here I might overhear much discussion of a crime with which such men would be familiar and possibly a hint that would lead me on the right trail. I really didn't have much enthusiasm for the idea, but I had to do something. I liked little Na, and I couldn't just sit still and do nothing while she was in danger. I wandered down toward the lower end of the city where the fish markets had been and where the sailors had gathered to carouse and fight in the days before the war that had wiped out the merchant marine and most of the fishing industry of Sonara. Now it was almost deserted, but there were still many of the old drinking places eking out a mean existence by catering to the men and women of the underworld. I went from one to the other of them, buying drinks here, gambling there, and always listening for any chance scrap of conversation that might lead to a clue. There was much talk on the subject of the abduction of the princess, for the matter was uppermost in all minds, but nothing was said in any of the places I went right up to the 36th hour that would have indicated any knowledge of the whereabouts of Na or of her abductors. I was discouraged and about hopeless as the 36th hour saw me sitting in a dive near the river wall of Sonara, where I pretended to be slightly under the influence of the vile drink that is popular there and tastes something like a mixture of gin and kerosene oil, of neither of which am I very fond, as a beverage. I let myself be enticed into a gambling game that somewhat resembles Fantan. I lost consistently and paid with great good humor. "You must be a rich man," said an ugly-looking customer seated beside me. "I know how to make money," I said. "I have made a lot this night. I may hang for it, so I might as well spend it." "That's the idea," he applauded. "But how did you make so much money so easily?" "That I should tell and get my neck twisted," I said. "I'll bet I know how he made it," offered another man, "and he will get his neck twisted for it, too, unless—" "Unless what?" I demanded truculently. "You know, and so do Prunt and Scrag. They've gone for the rest of theirs now." "Oh, they have they?" I demanded. "I haven't got the rest of mine. I don't know where to go to get it. They'll probably cheat me out of it." "Oh, well, I've got plenty anyway." I got up from the table and walked toward the door, staggering just a little. I hadn't the remotest idea that I was on a trail that would lead where I wanted to go, but there was a chance. This was probably the biggest crime that had been committed in Sonara since it was founded, and when a great deal of money was exhibited under the conditions and in the manner that I had exhibited mine, it would naturally suggest connection of some kind with the criminals, for a man of my apparent walk of life would not have come suddenly upon great wealth honestly. I had scarcely reached the door of the dive when I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to look into the cunning face of the man who had spoken to me last. "Let us talk together, my friend," he said. "What about?" I asked. "You have some money coming to you," he commenced. "What would you give me if I should show you where you could collect it?" "If you can do that, I might give you half," I said. "Very well," he said, "for half I will do it. But this is a bad night to be about on work of this kind. Since they stole the Zhong's daughter, the city is being searched and everyone being questioned. The boys got a lot of money for that. What you got for choking the old villain, Kirch, would be nothing beside what Muso paid to have the daughter of the Zhong brought to him." So I was off on a wrong trail. But how to get on the right one? The fellow was obviously drunk, which accounted for his loose tongue, and he knew something about the abduction of Na, but how much? And how was I to switch him from one trail to another? I saw that I would have to take the bull by the horns. What made you think I had anything to do with murdering Kirch? I demanded. Didn't you? He asked. Of course not, I assured him. I never said I did. Then how did you come by so much money? He demanded. Don't you suppose there were other jobs besides the Kirch job? I demanded. There were only 2 big jobs in town tonight, he said. If you were in on the other, you ought to know where to go. Well, I don't, I admitted. I think they're trying to beat me out of mine. They said they'd bring me the rest of mine down here, but they aren't here. They wouldn't tell me where they took the girl, either. I'd give anything to know. If I did, you can bet they'd come through, or I touched my sword significantly. How much would you give? He asked. What difference does that make to you? I demanded. You don't know where she is. Oh, I don't I? Just show me how high your money stacks. I know lots of things for a tall stack. Corvan money is all of the same metal, round pieces of different thicknesses, their centers punched out with different size circles, squares, ovals, and crosses, but all of the same outside diameter. Their value is determined by the weight of the metal each contains. They stack easily, and the thicker pieces of greatest value naturally stack higher, giving usage to the common expression a tall stack, meaning a considerable amount of money. Well, if you really showed me where she is, I said, I might give you 500 pandas. A panda has about the purchasing power in Corva that $1 would have in America. You haven't got that much, he said. I shook my pocket pouch so that the money in it rattled. Doesn't that sound like it? I asked. I like to feel money, not listen to it, he said. Well, come outside where no one will see us, and I'll show it to you. I saw the cunning glint in his eyes as we passed out into the avenue. Finding a spot that was deserted and also dimly lighted by a lamp in a window, I counted out 500 pandas into his cupped palms, definitely defeating for the moment any plan he had to murder me. Then, before he could transfer the money to his pocket pouch, I drew my pistol and shoved it into his belly. If there's any shooting to be done, I'll do it, I told him. Now take me to where the girl is, and no funny business. When you have done that, you may keep the money, but if you make a single break, or fail to show me the girl, I'll let you have it. Get going. He grinned a sickly grin, and turned away down the dark street. As he did so, I jerked his pistol from its holster, and shoved the muzzle of mine into the small of his back. I wasn't taking any chances. You're all right, fellow, he said. When this job's over, I'd like to work with you. You work quick, and you know what you're doing. Nobody ain't going to fool you. Thanks, I said. Be at the same place tomorrow night, and we'll talk it over. I thought this might keep him from trying to double-cross me, but I still kept my gun in his ribs. He led me along the river wall to an old, abandoned building at one end of which was a huge incinerator within a firebox large enough to hold 6 men. He stopped here and listened, looking furtively in all directions. She's in here, he whispered. This firebox opens into the inside of the building, too. Now give me back my pistol and let me go. Not so fast, I cautioned him. The agreement was that you were to show me the girl. Go on in. He hesitated, and I prodded him with my gun. They'll kill me, he whimpered. If you don't show me the girl, they won't have to, I threatened. Now don't talk any more, we may be overheard. If I have to go in alone, I'll leave you out here, dead. He said no more, but he was shaking as he crawled into the great incinerator. I laid his pistol on the ledge of the firebox and followed directly behind him. It was dark as a pocket in the firebox and not much better in the room into which we stepped, so dark that I had to hold onto my companion's trappings to keep him from eluding me entirely. We stood in silence, listening for a full minute. I thought I heard the murmur of voices. My guide moved forward cautiously, feeling his way step by step. It was evident that he had been here before. He crossed to the side of the room, where he found a bolted door. "This is for our getaway," he whispered, as he drew the bolt. I knew from the direction we had come that the door opened out onto the street. He turned and moved diagonally across the room again to the opposite wall. Here he found another door which he opened with the utmost caution. When it was opened, the murmur of voices became more distinct. Ahead of us, I could see a tiny ray of dim light coming apparently from the floor of the room. My guide led me forward to it, and I saw that it came through a hole in the flooring, possibly a knothole. "Look," he whispered. As I had to lie down on my stomach to look through the hole, I made him lie down, also. In the circumscribed range of my vision, I could not see much of the room below, but what I did see was almost enough. 2 men were sitting at a table, talking. One of them was Muso. I could see no girl, but I knew that she might be there outside the little circle that was visible to me. I could hear the men talking. "You don't really intend killing her, do you?" asked Muso's companion. "If I don't get a favorable reply from Tarman before the second hour, I most certainly shall," replied Muso. "If she would write her father as I have asked her to, she would be free to go at once, for I know that Tarman would not see his daughter die if she herself begged him to save her." "You'd better do it, Nah," said the other man. "The time is getting short." "Never," said a girl's voice, and I knew that I had found Nah. "You may go now," I whispered to my companion. "You will find your pistol on the ledge of the incinerator." "But wait! How can I get into that room?" "There is a trap door in the corner, to your right," he replied. He moved away so silently that I did not hear him go, but I knew that he had. Only a fool would have remained with me. Faintly into the darkness of the room came a suggestion of growing light. The sun was rising. The first hour had come. In 40 minutes of Earth time the second hour would strike the death knell of Nah, the daughter of Tarman. 18. A Tanjong. 40 minutes. What could I do in that time to ensure the safety of the princess? Had I found her only a little sooner, I could have summoned soldiers and surrounded the building. They would not have killed her had they known they were going to be taken. But I must do something. The precious minutes were slipping by. There was nothing for it but to take the bull by the horns and do the best I could. I rose and felt my way to the corner of the room. On hands and knees I groped about in the darkness for the trapdoor, and at last I found it. Gingerly I tried it to learn if it were locked from below. It was not. I raised it quickly and jumped through, my pistol still in my hand. I heard it slam shut above my head as I touched the floor. Luckily, I did not fall, and my advent had been so sudden and so unexpected that for an instant Muso and his companion seemed unable to move or speak. I backed to the wall and covered them. "Don't move," I warned, "or I'll kill you both." It was then that I first saw 2 men in the far corner of the dimly lighted room as they leaped to their feet from a pile of rags upon which they had been lying asleep. As they reached for their pistols I opened fire on them. Muso dropped to the floor behind the table at which he had been sitting, but his companion now drew his own weapon and leveled it at me. I shot him first. How all 3 of them could have missed me in that small room I cannot understand. Perhaps the brains of 2 of them were dulled by sleep, and the other was unquestionably nervous. I had seen his hand shake as it held his weapon, but miss me they did, and the second and third went down before they could find me with the deadly stream of RAs from their guns. Only Muso remained. I ordered him out from under the table and took his pistol from him, then I looked about for Nah. She was sitting on a bench at the far side of the room. "Have they harmed you in any way, Nah?" I asked. No, but who are you? Do you come from my father, the Zhong? Are you a friend or another enemy? I am your friend, I said. I have come to take you away from here and back to the palace. She did not recognize me in my black wig and mean apparel. Who are you? Demanded Muso, and what are you going to do to me? I am going to kill you, Muso, I said. I have hoped for this chance, but never expected to get it. Why do you want to kill me? I haven't harmed the princess. I was only trying to frighten Tarman into giving me back the throne that belongs to me. You lie, Muso, I said, but it is not this thing alone that I am going to kill you for, not something that you may say you did not intend doing, but something you did. What did I ever do to you? I never saw you before. Oh, yes you have. You sent me to Amlot to my death, as you hoped, and you tried to steal my woman from me. His eyes went wide and his jaw dropped. Carson of Venus, he gasped. Yes, Carson of Venus, who took your throne away from you and is now going to take your life, but not because of what you did to him. I could forgive that, Muso, but I can't forgive the suffering you caused my princess. It is for that you are about to die. You wouldn't shoot me down in cold blood, he cried. I should, I said, but I am not going to. We'll fight with swords. Draw. I had laid his pistol on the bench beside Na, and now I drew my own and placed it on the table at which Muso had been sitting, then we faced one another. Muso was no mean swordsman, and as our blades shattered the silence of that little room I commenced to suspect that I might have bitten off more than I could chew, so I fought warily and, I am free to admit, mostly on the defensive. That is no way to win any contest, but I knew that if I became too reckless in my attack he might easily slip cold steel through me. Yet something must be done. This could not go on like this forever. I redoubled my efforts, and because I had by now become accustomed to his mode of attack, which he seldom varied, I commenced to have the advantage. He realized it, too, and the yellow in him showed up immediately. Then I pressed my advantage. I backed him around the room, certain now that I could run him through almost at will. He stepped back against the table in what I took to be a last stand, then, suddenly, he hurled his sword directly in my face, and almost simultaneously I heard the brrr of an RA pistol. I had seen him reach for mine just as he hurled his sword at me. I expected to fall dead, but I did not. Instead, Muso slumped backward across the table and then rolled off onto the floor, and as I looked around, I saw Na standing with Muso's pistol still leveled in her hand. She had robbed me of my revenge, but she had saved my life. As I looked at her, she sat down very suddenly and burst into tears. She was just a little girl, and she had been through too much in the past few hours. She soon regained control of herself, however, and looked up and smiled at me, rather wanly. I really didn't know you, she said, until Muso called you by name. Then I knew that I was safe, that is, safer. We are not safe yet. His men were to return here at the second hour. It must be almost that now. It is, and we must get out of here, I said. Come. I slipped my pistol back into its holster, and we stepped to the ladder that led up to the trapdoor, and at the same moment we heard the heavy tramp of feet in the building above us. We were too late. They have come, whispered Na. What are we to do? Go back to your bench and sit down, I said. I think one man may hold this doorway against many. Stepping quickly to the sides of the dead men, I gathered their pistols and carried them all to a point from which I could command the ladder with the least danger to myself. The footsteps approached the room above us, they entered it and crossed to the trapdoor, and then a voice called down, "Hello, there, Muso." "What do you want of Muso?" I asked. "I have a message for him." "I will take it for him," I said. "Who are you? And what is your message?" "I am Yulin, of the Zhong's Guard. The message is from Tarman." He agrees to your demands provided you will return Na to him unharmed and guarantee the future safety of Tarman and his family. I breathed a sigh of relief and sat down in a nearby chair. Muso scorns your offer, I said. Come down, Yulin, and see for yourself why Muso is no longer interested. No trickery, he warned, as he raised the trapdoor and descended. When he turned at the foot of the ladder and saw the 4 corpses lying on the floor, his eyes went wide as he recognized one of them as Muso. Then he saw Na and crossed to her. You are not harmed, Janjong? He asked. No, she replied. But if it had not been for this man, I should have been dead by now. He turned to me. I could see that he recognized me no more than others had. Who are you? He asked. Don't you remember me? Na giggled, and I had to laugh myself. What is so funny? He demanded. Yulin flushed angrily. That you should so soon forget a good friend, I said. I never saw you before, he snapped, for he knew we were making fun of him. You never saw Carson of Venus? I asked, then he laughed with us as he finally pierced my disguise. But how did you know where to find the princess? When Tarman gave the required signal of acquiescence, explained Yulin, one of Muso's agents told us where she might be found. We were soon out of that dank cellar and on our way to the palace, where we brushed past the guards under escort of Yulin and hastened through the palace to the Zhong's own quarters. Here Tarman and Jahara sat waiting for word from the last of the searchers or from the emissary the former had dispatched to Muso at the urgings of Jahara and his own heart. As the door was thrown open, we sent Narin, Yulin and I remaining in a small antechamber, knowing that they would wish to be alone. A Zhong would not wish his officers to see him weep, as I am sure Tarman must have wept for joy at Na's safe return. It was but a few minutes before he came out into the antechamber. His face was grave by now. He looked somewhat surprised to see me, but he only nodded as he turned to Yulin. When will Muso return to the palace? He asked. We both looked at him in surprise. Didn't the Janjong tell you? Asked Yulin. She must have told you. Tell me what? She was crying so for joy that she could not speak coherently. What is there to tell me, that I may not already guess? Muso is dead, said Yulin. You are still Zhong. From Yulin, and later from Na, he finally got the whole story, pieced out with what I told him of my search through the city, and I have seldom seen a man more grateful. But I expected that from Tarman, so I was not surprised. He always gave fully of himself to his friends and his loyal retainers. I thought I should sleep forever when I went to bed that morning in my apartments in the Zhong's palace, but they didn't let me sleep as long as I could have wished. At the 12th hour I was awakened by one of Tarman's aides and summoned to the great throne room. Here I found the Grand Council of nobles assembled around a table at the foot of the throne and the rest of the room crowded with the aristocracy of Corva. Tarman and Jahara and Na sat in their respective thrones upon the dais, and there was a 4th chair at Tarman's left. The aide led me to the foot of the dais before Tarman and asked me to kneel. I think Tarman is the only man in 2 worlds before whom I should be proud to kneel. Above all other men, he deserves reverence for his qualities of mind and soul. And so I knelt. To save the life of my daughter, commenced Tarman, I offered my throne to Muso with the consent of the Grand Council. You, Carson of Venus, saved my daughter and my throne. It is the will of the Grand Council, in which I concur, that you be rewarded with the highest honor in the power of a Zhong of Corva to bestow. I therefore elevate you to the rank of royalty, and as I have no son, I adopt you as my own and confer upon you the title of Tanjong of Corva. Then he rose and, taking me by the hand, led me to the vacant throne chair at his left. I had to make a speech then, but the less said about that the better. As a maker of speeches, I am a fairly good aviator. There were speeches by several great nobles, and then we all trooped to the banquet hall and overate for a couple of hours. This time I did not sit at the foot of the table. From a homeless wanderer a few months earlier, I had been suddenly elevated to the second position in the empire of Corva. But that was all of lesser moment to me than the fact that I had a home and real friends. If only my duer had been there to share it all with me. Here at last I had found a country where we might live in peace and honor, only to be thwarted by that same malign fate that had snatched duer from my arms on so many other occasions. 19. Pirates. I never really had an opportunity to more than taste the honors and responsibilities that devolve upon a crown prince, for the next day I started outfitting my little fishing boat for the long trip to Vapaja. Tarman tried to dissuade me, as did Jahara and Na and all my now countless friends in Corva, but I could not be prevailed upon to abandon the venture, however hopeless I myself felt it to be. The very ease and luxury of my new position in life made it seem all the more urgent that I search for duer, for to enjoy it without her seemed the height of disloyalty. I should have hated it always had I remained. Every assistance was given me in outfitting my craft. Large water tanks were installed and a device for distilling fresh water from seawater. Concentrated foods, preserved foods, dehydrated fruits and vegetables, nuts, every edible thing that could be preserved for a considerable time were packed away in waterproof containers. New sails were made of the strong, light spider cloth that is common among the civilized countries of Amta, where spiders are bred and kept for the purpose of spinning their webs for commercial use, as are silkworms on Earth. They gave me weapons and ammunition and warm blankets and the best navigation instruments available, so that I was as well equipped for the journey as it was possible for anyone to be. At last the time of my departure arrived, and I was escorted to the river with all the pomp and ceremony befitting my exalted rank. There were troops and bands and 100 gorgeously caparisoned gantas bearing not only the nobility of Corva but its royalty as well, for Tarman and Jahara and the princess now rode with me in the howdah of the Jong's own ganta. Cheering throngs lined the avenues and it should have been a happy event, but it was not for me, at least, for I was leaving these good friends, as I full believed, forever and with little or no hope of attaining my heart's desire. I shall not dwell further upon the sadness of that leave-taking. The pall of it hung over me as I sailed out upon the broad expanse of that vast and lonely ocean, nor did my spirits lift until long after the distant mountains of Anlap had dropped below the horizon. Then I shook the mood from me as I looked with eagerness toward the future and set my mind solely upon success. I had set a range of from 10 to 20 days for the cruise to Vapaja, depending, of course, upon the winds, but there was always the possibility of missing the island entirely, notwithstanding the fact that it was a continent in size, being some 4,000 miles long by 1,500 wide at its greatest width. Such a supposition might seem ridiculous on Earth, but here conditions were vastly different. Maps were inaccurate. Those available indicated that Anlap was scarcely more than 500 miles from Vapaja, but I knew that at least 1,500 miles of ocean must separate them. Duer and I had learned that when we had flown it. The reason their maps must be inaccurate is due to their false conception of the shape of the planet, which they believe to be a flat disk floating on a sea of molten rock, and their further belief that the Antarctic region forms the periphery and what I knew to be the equator, the center of the disk. This naturally distorts every possible conception of the shape and size of oceans and land masses. These people in the southern hemisphere of Venus have not the remotest idea of the existence of the northern hemisphere. I shall not inflict upon you the monotony of the first week of that journey. The wind held steady, and at night I lashed the tiller and slept with a comparatively peaceful mind, as I had devised an alarm that sounded whenever the boat deviated from its course a certain number of points. It was a simple device electrically controlled by the needle of the compass. I was not awakened on an average of 2 or 3 times in a night, so I felt that I was keeping fairly well on my course, but I wished that I knew what, if anything, the currents were doing to me. Since the coast of Anlap had dropped below the horizon I had seen no land, nor had a single ship appeared upon that vast watery expanse of loneliness. The waters often teemed with fish, and occasionally I saw monstrous creatures of the deep, some of which defy description and would challenge belief. The most numerous of these larger creatures must attain a length of fully 1,000 feet. It has a wide mouth and huge, protruding eyes between which a smaller eye is perched upon a cylindrical shaft some 15 feet above its head. The shaft is erectile, and when the creature is at rest upon the surface or when it is swimming normally beneath, it reclines along its back, but when alarmed or searching for food, the shaft springs erect. It also functions as a periscope as the beast swims a few feet beneath the surface. The Amtorians call it erotic, meaning three-eye. When I first saw one, I thought it an enormous ocean liner as it lay on the surface of the ocean in the distance. At dawn of the 8th day I saw the one thing that I could have wished least of all to see, a ship, for no ship that sailed the Amtorian seas could conceivably contain any friends of mine, unless, perhaps, the Sofal was still carrying on its piratical trade with the crew that had followed me so loyally in the mutiny that had given me command of it. That, however, was doubtful. The vessel was some distance to starboard and was moving in an easterly direction. Within an hour it would cross my course, which was due south. Hoping to avoid detection because of the insignificant size of my little craft, I lowered my sails and drifted. For half an hour the ship held to its course, then its bow swung in my direction. I had been sighted. It was a small vessel of about the tonnage of the Sofal, and very similar in appearance. It had no masts, sails, stacks, nor funnels. Aft were two oval deckhouses, a small one resting on top of a larger. On top of the upper house was an oval tower surmounted by a small crow's nest. At bow and stern and from the crow's nest rose staffs from which long pennons flew. The main staff, above the crow's nest, was supposed to fly the flag of the country to which the ship belonged, the flag at the bow, the city from which it sailed. The stern flag was usually the house flag of the owner. In the case of warships, his staff carried the battle flag of the nation to which it belonged. As the ship neared me, I saw but one thing: a ship without country or city was a falter, a pirate ship. The flag at the stern was probably the personal flag of the captain. Of all the disasters that could have befallen me, this was about the worst, that I should run foul of a pirate ship, but there was nothing to do about it. I could not escape. As I had thought it best to wear my black wig through the streets of Sonara on my way to the boat, I still had it with me, and as my yellow hair had only partially grown out and as I had a black-tipped mane reaching from forehead to nape, I put the wig on now rather than take the chance that my weird coiffure might arouse suspicion aboard the pirate craft. As the ship came close, it lay to. I saw its name painted along the bow in the strange Amtorian characters, Nojo Ganja. Fully 100 men lined the port rail watching me, as were several officers upon the upper decks of the houses. One of the latter hailed me. "Come alongside," he shouted, "and come aboard." It was not an invitation, it was a command. There was nothing to do but obey, so I raised one sail and brought my craft under the lee rail of the pirate. They tossed me a rope which I made fast to the bow and another with knots in it up which I climbed to the deck, then several of them slid down into my boat and passed everything in it up to their fellows above. After that, they cut my boat adrift and got under way. All this I saw from an upper deck where I had been taken to be questioned by the captain. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am called Sofal," I said. Sofal was the name of my pirate ship and means the killer. "Sofal," he repeated, a little ironically I thought. "And from what country do you hail? And what are you doing out here in the middle of the ocean in a small boat like that?" "I have no country," I replied. "My father was a Faltargan, and I was born on a falter. I was rapidly becoming a proficient liar, I who had always prided myself on my veracity, but I think a man is sometimes justified in lying, especially if it saves a life. Now the word Faltargan has an involved derivation. Falter, pirate ship, derives from ganful, criminal, which is derived from gan, man, and foul, kill, and nota, ship, roughly criminal ship. Add gan, man, to falter, and you have pirate shipman, or pirate, Faltargan. "And so I suppose you are a pirate," he said, "and that thing down there is your falter." "No," I said, "and yes, but, rather, yes and no." "What are you driving at?" he demanded. Yes, I am a pirate, but no, that is not a falter. It is just a fishing boat. I am surprised that an old sailor should have thought it a pirate ship. You have a loose tongue, fellow, he snapped. And you have a loose head, I retorted. That is why you need a man like me as one of your officers. I have captained my own falter, and I know my trade. From what I have seen, you haven't enough officers to handle a bunch of cutthroats such as I saw on deck. What do you say? I say you ought to be thrown overboard, he growled. Go to the deck and report to Fowler. Tell him I said to put you to work. An officer. Cut out my liver. But you have got nerve. If you make a good sailor, I'll let you live. That's the best you'll get, though. Loose head, and I could hear him grumbling as I went down the companionway to the deck. I don't know just why I had deliberately tried to antagonize him, unless it was that I had felt that if I cringed before him he would have been more likely to have felt contempt for me and killed me. I was not unfamiliar with men of his type. If you stand up to them they respect and, perhaps, fear you, for most swashbucklers are, at heart, yellow. When I reached the deck I had an opportunity to inspect my fellow sailors more closely. They were certainly a prize aggregation of villainous-looking scoundrels. They eyed me with suspicion and dislike and not a little contempt, as they appraised my rich apparel and handsome weapons which seemed to them to bespeak the dandy rather than the fighting man. Where is Fowler? I asked of the first group I approached. There, Ortige Ulger, he replied in an assumed falsetto, as he pointed to a huge bear of a man who was glowering at me a few yards away. Those within earshot guffawed at this witticism. Ortige Ulger means my love. Evidently they thought my apparel effeminate. I had to smile a little myself, as I walked over to Fowler. The captain told me to report to you for duty, I said. What's your name? He demanded. And what do you think you can do aboard a ship like the Nojo Ganja? My name is Sofal, I replied, and I can do anything aboard ship or ashore that you can do, and do it better. Ho! Ho! He pretended to laugh, the killer. Listen, brothers, here is the killer, and he can do anything better than I can. Let's see him kill you, then, cried a voice from behind him. Fowler wheeled about. Who said that? He demanded, but nobody answered. Again a voice from behind him said, You're afraid of him, you sailful of wind. It seemed to me that Fowler was not popular. He completely lost his temper then, over which he appeared to have no control whatsoever, and whipped out his sword. Without giving me an opportunity to draw, he swung a vicious cut at me that would have decapitated me had it connected. I leaped back in time to avoid it, and before he could recover, I had drawn my own weapon. Then we settled down to business, as the men formed a circle around us. As we measured one another's strength and skill in the first few moments of the encounter, I heard such remarks as, Fowler will cut the fool to pieces, he hasn't a chance against Fowler, I wish he had, and kill the Mistal, fellow, we're for you. Fowler was no swordsman, he should have been a butcher. He swung terrific cuts that would have killed a Ganta, could he have landed, but he couldn't land, and he telegraphed his every move. I knew what he was going to do before he started to do it. Every time he cut, he left himself wide open. I could have killed him any one of half a dozen times in the first 3 minutes of our duel, but I didn't wish to kill him. For all I knew he might be a favorite of the captain, and I had already done enough to antagonize that worthy. For the right moment to do the thing I wanted to do, I had to bide my time. He rushed me about here and there dodging his terrific swings until, at last, I got tired of it and pricked him in the shoulder. He bellowed like a bull at that, and, seizing his sword with both hands, came at me like a charging Ganta. Then I pricked him again, and after that he went more warily, for I guess he had commenced to realize that I could kill him if I wished. Now he gave me the opportunity one had been awaiting, and in an instant I had disarmed him. As his weapon clattered to the deck, I stepped in, my point at his heart. Shall I kill him? I asked. Yes, rose in a thunderous chorus from the excited sailors. I dropped my point. No, I shall not kill him this time, I said. Now pick up your sword, Fowler, and we'll call everything square. What do you say? He mumbled something as he stooped to retrieve his weapon, then he spoke to a one-eyed giant standing in the front row of spectators. This fellow will be in your watch, Nern, he said. See that he works. With that, he quit the deck. The men gathered around me. Why didn't you kill him? Asked one. And have the captain order me thrown overboard? I demanded. No. I can use my brains as well as my sword. Well, said Nern, there was at least a chance that he wouldn't have, but there is no chance that Fowler won't stab you in the back the first chance he gets. My duel with Fowler had established me in the good graces of the crew, and when they found that I could speak the language of the sea and of the pirate ship, they accepted me as one of them. Nern seemed to take a special fancy to me. I think it was because he hoped to inherit Fowler's rank in the event the latter were killed, for several times he suggested that I pick another quarrel with Fowler and kill him. While talking with Nern, I asked him whether Nojo Ganja was bound. We're trying to find Vipaja, he said. We've been trying to find it for a year. Why do you want to find it? I asked. We're looking for a man the tourists want, he said. They've offered 1,000,000 pandas to anyone who'll bring him to capture alive. Are you tourists? I asked. The tourists are members of a revolutionary political party that conquered the former empire of Vipaja, which once spread over a considerable portion of the south temperate zone of Amta. They are the bitter enemies of Mintep as well as of all countries that have not fallen into their hands. No, replied Nern, we are not tourists, but we could use 1,000,000 pandas of anybody's money. Who is this Vipajan they want so badly? I asked. I assumed that it was Mintep. Oh, a fellow who killed one of their Ongians in Capta. His name is Carson. So. The long arm of Thora had reached out after me. I was already in the clutches of its fingers, but, happily for me, I was the only one who knew it. However, I realized that I must escape from the Nojo Ganja before it touched at any Thoran port. How do you know this Carson is in Vipaja? I asked. We don't know, replied Nern. He escaped from Capta with the Janjong of Vipaja. If they are alive, it is reasonable to believe they are in Vipaja. That, of course, is where he would have taken the Janjong. We are going to search Vipaja first. If he isn't there, we'll go back to Nubal and search inland. I should think that would be quite a man-sized job, I remarked. Yes, it will, he admitted, but he should be an easy man to trace. Here and there inland someone must have seen him, and if anyone once saw this Carson they'd never forget him. He has yellow hair, and as far as anyone ever heard, no one else in the world has yellow hair. I was grateful for my black wig. I hoped it was on securely. How are you going to get into the tree cities of Vipaja? I asked. They don't care much for strangers there, you know. What do you know about it? He demanded. I've been there. I lived in Kuard. You did? That's just where we expect to find Carson. Then maybe I can help, I suggested. I'll tell the captain. No one aboard has ever been to Kuard. But how do you expect to get into that city? You haven't told me that. It's going to be very difficult. They'll probably let one man go into trade, he said. You see, we've picked up a lot of jewels and ornaments off the ships we've taken. A man could go in with some of these, and if he kept his ears and eyes open, he'd soon find out whether or not Carson was there. If he is, we'll have to find some way to entice him aboard the Nojo Ganja. That should be easy, I said. Nern shook his head. I don't know about that, he said. It would be easy for me, knowing Kuard as I do, I said. You see, I have friends there. Well, first we've got to find Vipaja, he remarked quite aptly. That's easy, too, I told him. How so? Go tell the captain that I can pilot him to Vipaja, I said. You really can? Well, I think I can. One never knows, what with the rotten maps we have. I'll go now and talk with the captain, he said. You wait here and, say, keep a weather eye open for Fola. He's the stinkingest mistal of all the stinking mistals on Amta. Just keep your back against something solid and your eyes open. XX, to Kuard. I watched Nan as he crossed the deck and ascended the companionway leading to the captain's quarters. If the captain could be persuaded to trust me, here was such an opportunity to enter Kuard as might never come to me again. I knew from the course that the Nojo Ganja was holding that she was paralleling the coast of Vipaja, but too far offshore for the land to be visible. At least I was confident that such was true. I really could not know it, as one could know nothing for certain about his position on one of these Amtorian seas unless he were in sight of land. As I stood by the rail waiting for Nan to return, I saw Fola come on deck. His expression was black as a thunder cloud. He came directly toward me. A man near me said, "Look out, fellow. He's going to kill you." Then I saw that Fola carried one hand behind him and that his pistol holster was empty. I didn't wait then to see what he was going to do or when he was going to do it. I knew. I whipped out my own gun just as he raised his. We fired simultaneously. I could feel the RAs pinging past my ear, then I saw Fola slump to the deck. Instantly a crowd surrounded me. "You'll go overboard for this," said a man. "It won't be as easy as that," said another, "but in the end you'll go overboard." An officer who had witnessed the affair came running down from the upper deck house. He pushed his way through the crowd of sailors to me. "So you're trying to live up to your name, are you, fellow?" he demanded. "Fola was trying to kill him," spoke a sailor. "And after he'd spared Fola's life," said another. "Fola had a right to kill any member of the crew he wanted to kill," snapped the officer. "You mistols know that as well as I do. Take this fellow up to the captain and throw Fola overboard." So I was taken up to the captain's quarters. He was still talking with Nern as I entered. "Here he is now," said Nern. "Come in," said the captain, rather decently, "I want to talk with you." The officer who had accompanied me looked rather surprised at the captain's seemingly friendly manner. "This man has just killed Fola," he blurted. Nern and the captain looked at me in astonishment. "What difference does it make?" I asked. "He wasn't any good to you, anyway, and he was just about to kill the only man who can pilot you to Vipaja and get into the city of Kuard for you. You ought to thank me for killing him." The captain looked up at the officer. "Why did he kill him?" he asked. The officer told the story quite fairly, I thought, and the captain listened without comment until he had concluded, then he shrugged. "Fola," he said, "was a mistal. Someone should have killed him long ago. You may go," he said to the officer and the sailors who had brought me up. "I want to talk with this man." When they had left, he turned to me. "Nan says that you can pilot this ship to Vipaja and that you are acquainted in Kuard. Is that right?" "I am well acquainted in Kuard," I replied, "and I believe I can pilot the Nojo Ganja to Vipaja. You will have to help me get into Kuard, though. I'll be all right after I get in." "What course shall we take?" he asked. "What is your course now?" "Due east," he replied. "Change it to south." He shook his head, but he gave the necessary orders. I could see that he was very skeptical of our chances of reaching Vipaja on the new course. "How long before we'll raise land?" he asked. "That, I can't tell," I said, "but I'd keep a sharp lookout, and at night cut your speed down. He dismissed me then, telling me that I'd be quartered with the officers. I found my new companions little different from the common sailors. They were all bravos and rascals, and, without exception, had been common sailors themselves. I found little in common with them, and spent most of my time in the crow's nest with the lookout watching for land. It was right after the first hour the next morning that I discerned the black-appearing mass ahead that I knew to be the giant forest of Vapaja, those mighty trees that rear their heads 5,000 and 6,000 feet to drink sustenance from the moisture of the inner cloud envelope that surrounds the planet. Somewhere in that black mass and 1,000 feet above the ground was the great tree city of Kuard. There, too, if she still lived, would be my due heir. I went down to the captain's quarters myself to report sighting land, and as I reached the door I heard voices. I would not have stopped to listen, but the first word I heard was the name they knew me by, Sofal. The captain was speaking to one of his officers. And when we are through with him, see that he's put out of the way. Let the men know that it was because he killed Fola. We can't let them think they can get away with anything like that. If I hadn't needed him, I'd have had him killed yesterday. I walked away as noiselessly as I could, and returned a moment later, whistling. When I had reported land, they both came out. It was plainly visible by now, and shortly after the second hour we were close inshore. We were a little too far east, so we came about and skirted the coast until I sighted the harbour. In the meantime I had suggested to the captain that he'd better lower his pirate flags and fly something more in keeping with his purportedly peaceful designs. "What country are they friendly with?" he asked. "What far country, whose ships and men they might not be expected to recognize?" "I am quite sure that a ship from Corva would be welcomed," I told him, so the Corvan flag was run up at the bow and above the deck houses, while, for an owner's flag at the stern, he used one he had taken from a ship he had sunk. There was already a ship in the harbour, a vessel from one of the little islands that lie west of Vapaja. It was loading up with tarol. There was a strong company of Vepajan warriors on guard, for the port is quite some distance from Kuard, and there is always danger of attack by Thorists or other enemies. The captain sent me ashore to negotiate for entry into Kuard as well as to assure the Vepajans that we were there on a friendly mission. I found the company in charge of 2 officers, both of whom I had known when I lived in Kuard. One was Tofar, who had been captain of the palace guard and high in the confidence of Mintep. The other was Ultha, brother of my best friend in Kuard, Camlot. I fairly shook in my boots as I recognized them, for I did not see how it could be possible that they should fail to know me. However, as I stepped from the small boat, I walked boldly toward them. They looked me straight in the face without a sign of recognition. "What do you want in Vapaja?" they asked, their tones none too friendly. "We are trading with friendly countries," I said. "We are from Corva." "Corva," they both exclaimed. We had heard that the merchant marine of Corva had been destroyed in the last war. "Practically all of it," I said. "A few ships escaped because they were on long cruises and knew nothing of the war until it was over. Our ship was one of these." "What have you to trade?" asked Tofar. "Ornaments and jewels, principally," I replied. "I should like to take them into one of your big cities. I think the ladies of the Jong's palace would like to see them." He asked me if I had any with me, and when I showed him some that I had brought along in my pocket pouch, he was much interested, and desired to see more. I did not want to take him aboard the Nojo Ganja for fear his suspicions might be aroused by the ruffianly appearance of the officers and crew. "When do you go back to the city?" I asked. "We leave here as soon as they finish loading that ship," he replied. "That should be within the hour, then we leave immediately for Kuard." "I'll get all my articles," I told him, "and go to Kuard with you." Ultha seemed rather taken aback by this, and looked questioningly at Tofar. "Oh, I think it will be all right," said the latter. "After all, he's only one man, and anyway he's from Corva, that will make a difference with Mintep." He and the Janjong were well treated there. I have heard him speak in the highest terms of the Zhong of Korva and the nobles he met there. I had difficulty in hiding my relief at this evidence that Jue was alive and in Kuard. But was she alive? She had evidently reached Vapaja with her father, but she might already have been destroyed for having broken the taboo custom had laid upon her as Janjong of Vapaja. You mention a Janjong, I said. I am glad to know that your Zhong has a daughter. He will wish to buy some of my jewels for her. They made no reply, but I saw them exchange a quick glance. Go and get your stuff, Tofa said, and we'll take you with us when we return to Kuard. The captain was delighted when he found what excellent progress I had made. Try to persuade the man Carson to return to the ship with you, if you find he is in Kuard, he said. I shall certainly find him in Kuard, I told him. I am sure of that. A half hour later I set out with Tofar, Altha, and their company through the great forest toward Kuard. We had not gone far when Altha told me that I should have to be blindfolded, and after that a soldier walked on either side of me to guide me and keep me from stumbling over obstacles. Knowing as I did how jealously the Vepajans have to guard the secret entrances to their tree cities, I was not at all surprised at this precaution, but I may say that it made most awkward traveling. At last, however, we reached a spot where I was conducted through a doorway, and after the door was closed, the bandage was removed from my eyes. I found myself in the hollow interior of a great tree, standing in a cage with Tofar, Altha, and some of the warriors. The others waited on the ground beside the cage. A signal was given, and the cage started to rise. For 1,000 feet we were hoisted by a great windlass to the street level of Kuard. Once again I stood on the high-flung walkways of the first Amtorian city I had ever seen. Somewhere near me was Jue, if she still lived. I could feel my heart throb from the excitement of the moment. Take me to the palace, I said to Tofar. I should like to get permission to show these beautiful things to the women of the Zhong's retinue. Come, he said, I'll see if we can get permission. A short walk brought us to the enormous tree from the interior of which the rooms of the palace of Mintap are carved. How familiar it all was! How it recalled my first days on Venus, and that day of days that I had first seen Jue and first loved her. Now I was coming again to the palace of her father, but with a price upon my head. At the entrance to the palace was the familiar guard. I knew the captain of it well, but he did not recognize me. When Tofar stated my request, the captain entered the palace, telling us to wait. He was gone for some time, but when he returned he said that Mintap would be glad to welcome a Corvan merchant to his palace. He has sent word to the women that you will show your wares in the reception room inside the entrance, said the captain. They will be gathering there soon, so you might as well come in. I'll leave him with you, then, said Tofar. I reached into my package and selected a jeweled ring, which I proffered to Tofar. Please accept this for your kindness to me, I said, and take it to your woman with my compliments. If he had only known that Carson Napier, Carson of Venus, was the donor. The women of the palace gathered in the reception room, and I spread my jewels and ornaments out before them. I had known many of them, and most of the men who came with them or followed them in to see what I had to offer, but not a one knew me. There was one particularly lovely girl whom I knew to have been very close to Jue, one of her ladies-in-waiting, in fact, and her I sought to draw into conversation. She was much interested in one piece, but said that she could not afford to buy anything so expensive. But your man, I said. Certainly he will buy it for you. I have no man, she said. I serve the Janjong, and I may have no man until she takes one, or until she dies. Her voice broke with a sob. Take it, I whispered. I have sold many already. I can easily spare this piece, then, when I come again, if you can, you may pay me. Oh, but I couldn't do that, she cried, a little startled. Please, I begged. It will make me very happy to know that this lovely piece, which I myself so much admire, has a setting worthy of its beauty. I could see that she wanted it very badly, and when a woman wants a piece of jewelry or apparel, she will stop at little to possess it. Well, she said, after a pause, during which she fondled and admired the bauble, I suppose I might pay you some time, and if I couldn't, I could give it back to you. I am glad that you have decided to keep it, I said. I have another piece here that I should like very much to show to the Janjong. Do you suppose it would be possible? Oh, no, she said. That would be quite impossible, and anyway, again her voice broke. She is in trouble? I asked. She nodded. She is going to die. She spoke in an awed whisper. Die? I asked. Why? The Council of Nobles has so decreed. You love her? Yes, of course. I would give my life for her. Do you mean that? I demanded. She looked at me in surprise. I had let my emotions get the better of my caution. Why do you take such an interest? She asked. I looked at her for a full minute, I guess, trying to read her soul through her eyes. I could see nothing in them but truth and sincerity and love for my duer. I am going to tell you why, I said. I am going to trust you. I am going to put my life in your hands and the life of your Janjong as well. I am Carson Napier, Carson of Venus. Her eyes went wide and she caught her breath. She looked at me for a long time. Yes, she said, I see now, but you have changed so. Suffering and a black wig make a big change in one's appearance, I said. I have come here to save Duer. Will you help me? I told you once I would give my life for her, she said. That was no idle speech. What do you want me to do? I want you to get me into Duer's quarters in some way and hide me there. That is all I ask of you. She thought for a moment. I have a plan, she said, presently. Gather up your things and prepare to leave. Say that you will return tomorrow. I did as she bid, making several sales at the same time. I told the purchasers that I would take payment when I came back the next day. I almost smiled when I thought of the rage of the pirate captain. Could he have known that I was giving his treasure away? When I had at last gathered up what remained, I started toward the door. Then Vihara, the lady-in-waiting, spoke to me in a voice that all might hear. Before you go, she said, I wish that you would bring your things to the anteroom of my apartments. I have a piece of jewelry which I should like to match if possible. I think I saw something of yours that would answer. Thank you, I said, I'll come with you now. So we walked out of the reception room, and she led me along corridors to a door which she opened with a key, after glancing quickly around to see if we had been observed. Quick, she whispered. In here. These are the apartments of the Janjong. She is alone. I have done all that I can. Goodbye and good luck. She closed the door after me and locked it. I found myself in a very small waiting room, empty but for two long benches, one on either side. Later I learned that it was where servants waited to be interviewed by the Janjong. I crossed to a door at the opposite end and opened it quietly. Before me was a beautifully furnished apartment. On a divan, reading, was a woman. It was Duer. I entered the room, and as I did so she turned and looked at me. Her eyes went wide with incredulity as she sprang to her feet and faced me, then she ran and threw herself into my arms. Of all, she alone had known me. Neither of us could speak for a full minute, and then, though there was so much to say, I would not let her speak of but one thing, nor would I a plan of escape. It will be simple, now that you are here, she said. The Council of Nobles has condemned me to die. I suppose they could do nothing else. They do not wish my death. They are all my friends, but the laws that govern the Jongs of Vapaja are stronger than friendship or their love for me or anything in the world except my love for you and yours for me. They will be glad if I escape, for they have done their duty. My father will be glad, too. But not the Jong of Vapaja, I said. I think he will be a little glad also, she said. Why couldn't you have escaped without me, if it is so easy to escape? I asked. Because I have given my word not to violate my arrest, she replied. But I cannot help it if someone takes me by force. She was very serious, and so I did not smile outwardly. Duer is very sweet. We talked then and planned until after dark. When her food was brought, she hid me, and then she shared it with me. We waited until the city had quieted down, then she came close to me. You will have to carry me out of my quarters, she said, for I may not go of my own free will. In the palace there is a secret shaft down the interior of the great tree to the ground. There is no lift there, only a very long and tiresome climb down a ladder. It was never intended to be used except in emergencies of life and death, and only the Jong and his family know of its existence. Down this we clambered. I thought that we should never reach the ground, but at last we did. Duer had told me that she had fastened the ship down not far from this tree, which is close to the edge of the forest. If it was still there, and unharmed, our escape would be assured. If it were not, we were lost. That was a chance we had to take, for Duer was to have died on the morrow. There was no time for me to investigate. Leaving the base of the tree, we groped our way through the darkness, constantly fearful of attack by one of the terrible beasts that roam the Vapajan forest. When I finally thought that we must have missed the Ainotar in the darkness, or that it had been taken away, I saw it looming in front of us, and I am not ashamed to admit that tears came to my eyes as I realized that my Duer was safe at last, safe and with me. A few minutes later we zoomed into the Amtorian sky, and, leveling off, turned the nose of the ship out over the grey Amtorian Sea toward the northwest and the kingdom of Corva, our kingdom. Toward peace and happiness and friends and love. The end.